Welcome to Late Night Story. When the world goes silent and shadows stretch longer, some stories awaken, whispered only to those still awake. So put on your headphones, turn down the lights, and let me guide you through the quiet hours. If you're listening alone, you're exactly where you need to be. If everyone can leave a comment to let me know where you are listening from in the world, don't forget to subscribe before you drift too far into the dark.
Story 1. I answered a knock at my friend's door last night, but the person outside was me. When I look back, I can still smell the candle wax. Brandon's girlfriend, Kate, had this habit of lighting 5 different scents at once. Like the mix of vanilla, pine, and burnt sugar could disguise the fact that her apartment always felt too still. My girlfriend, Lila, teased her for it, while the 4 of us sat around the coffee table eating takeout noodles and half watching a movie while playing Uno. It was supposed to be a normal night. I remember thinking how quiet the neighborhood was. The kind of quiet that makes you hear the hum of the refrigerator and the soft static between words. Brandon's place sat at the end of a cul-de-sac, one of those split-level rentals with a narrow porch and a single security light that never stayed on. We just started talking about weekend plans when the knock came. 3 sharp raps. Not hurried, not tentative. Confident. Brandon frowned, half rising from the couch. Expecting anyone? No, I said before I could stop myself. It wasn't my house, but the sound felt directed at me. The knock came again. Same rhythm, a beat of stillness between each hit. Kate looked at the door, then at Brandon. Probably a delivery mix-up. But Brandon wasn't moving. Neither was I. There was something about the cadence that made my stomach tighten. Relax, Lila said, nudging me. I'll check. Before I could tell her not to, she padded across the living room and flipped on the porch light. It flickered once, then steadied. I caught a glimpse through the window. A shadow on the other side of the frosted glass. Same height as me. Lila opened the door halfway. Then she froze. Brandon, she said quietly. You might want to come here. He joined her at the entryway, confusion flickering over his face. Kate leaned over the back of the couch. But I was already standing. I don't know what I expected. Maybe a prank, a neighbor. When I reached the door, the air felt thinner. The man outside looked exactly like me. Same jacket, same haircut, same tired circles under his eyes. Even the way he held his shoulders, slightly turned like he wasn't sure whether to step forward or back. It was mine. He smiled when he saw me. Hey, he said, voice perfectly calm. Why'd you change the locks? For a second, nobody said anything. My mind searched for an answer that made sense. Twin, look-alike, some kind of joke. Brandon muttered, what the hell? The man outside tilted his head. You gonna let me in? It's freezing. The breath left my lungs. Who are you? He blinked, surprised by the question. Funny, you tell me. I slammed the door before he could take another step. The sound echoed through the living room. Kate yelped. Lila grabbed my arm. What the hell, Matt? There's somebody out there pretending to be me. Brandon turned the deadbolt. Okay, that's insane. Maybe he just looks like you. No, I said. You saw him. It's not possible. From the porch came 3 more knocks. Slower this time. Lila whispered, what if it's a prank? What's that thing called deepfake or something? I shook my head. He had my clothes. He even talked like me. I don't think my parents would be able to tell. The knock stopped. Brandon exhaled shakily. I'm calling the cops. He grabbed his phone and started dialing, while he talked to the dispatcher. The rest of us stood there listening. No footsteps, no voice, just that quiet house breathing around us. When he hung up, he said, they're sending a car. We waited. 10 minutes. 15. Lila peeked through the side window once, but flinched back immediately. He's still there. I forced myself to look. Through the glass, my own face stared back at me. He was smiling faintly like he found something funny. Then he raised his hand and knocked again, softer, steady, patient. Brandon muttered, Jesus Christ. When the police arrived, 2 officers, They found nothing. The porch was empty. The night air looked untouched, like it had been that way all along. One officer asked if I'd been drinking. I told him no. He said they patrolled the area, told us to lock up, and left. We tried to laugh it off after that, but no one really could. Brandon suggested we all crash there for the night, just in case. Around midnight, Kate went to bed. Lila lay curled against me on the couch, pretending to sleep. Brandon stayed up, staring at the dark TV screen. That's when I heard it again. A single knock from the back door. Brandon looked at me like maybe I'd imagined it. Then we both heard the second one. 3 taps, the same slow rhythm. We crept into the kitchen. The small window above the sink looked out over the backyard. Porch light off. Darkness thick as velvet. I whispered, "Don't." Brandon ignored me and flicked the light switch. The bulb hummed to life, yellow and weak, casting a cone of light over the glass door. I was standing outside again. Same jacket, same posture. Except now there was something wrong with the way I smiled. It was too wide. He lifted a hand and rested it flat against the glass. The shape of it matched mine perfectly. Brandon hissed, "How is he doing that?" I wanted to answer, but my mouth felt dry. The thing outside leaned closer to the glass, forehead pressing gently until condensation fogged the pane. Then he whispered something. We couldn't hear through the door, but I knew the shape of the words. He mouthed, "Let me in." Brandon yanked the blinds closed. "Nope, we're done." We're calling again. But before he could reach for his phone, the kitchen light flickered and went out. The power didn't so much go out as hesitate. The hum of the fridge died. The clock on the stove blinked off, and the air itself seemed to thicken. I could hear Brandon's breath beside me, shallow and fast. Then came the soft drag of a hand, sliding down the other side of the glass door. We backed into the hallway. Lila appeared, rubbing her eyes. "What's happening?" I started to answer, but a shape moved past the curtained window. A shadow, my own, brushed the fabric, the faint outline of a face pressing just close enough for the curtain to twitch. Then it was gone. "Basement," Brandon whispered. "Breaker box." He headed for the stairs. Kate called from the bedroom, voice small, asking if everything was okay. No one answered. I didn't want to go into that dark stairwell, but standing still felt worse. I followed Brandon down, the flashlight on his phone cutting narrow slices of light across the unfinished walls. The switch was already flipped to on. "See," he said. "Power's fine. Must be..." Something slammed upstairs, hard enough to shake the ceiling dust loose. We bolted up the steps 2 at a time. The kitchen door was open. Cold air poured through the room like water. The curtain flapped against the wall. Kate stood frozen in the hallway, hand over her mouth. "He's inside," she whispered. I saw the trail of wet footprints on the tile before I saw him. Me, standing in the living room doorway, head tilted slightly, eyes unfocused. He looked like he'd forgotten how to breathe. Brandon grabbed a lamp from the table and held it like a weapon. "Stay back," he said, voice cracking. The thing turned its head toward him, slow as a hinge, and smiled. Not wide this time, sad. Lila said my name. I don't know which of us she meant. For a heartbeat, everyone was still. Then the thing moved, fast, impossible speed, knocking the lamp aside, sending a clattering. Brandon shouted. Kate screamed. Lila pulled at my arm, and we stumbled backward into the hall. I remember flashes, the sound of something heavy falling, glass breaking, Brandon's voice cutting off midward, his grunt as he hit the floor. When it was over, the silence was worse than the noise. The power blinked back on. The bulbs buzzed faintly overhead. The air smelled like ozone and sweat. I was standing in the middle of the living room. My hands were shaking. There was someone on the floor at my feet, lying still. He looked exactly like me. The police came after Kate called them. I barely remember the sirens, just the questions. Where did the intruder come from? Why did he look like me? What happened to Brandon? I kept saying, I don't know. One of the officers pulled me aside and asked again, slower, like maybe I'd stop lying if he softened his voice. He pointed at the sheet-covered body. You expect me to believe you don't recognize him? I looked at the hand slipping out from under the sheet. Same scar across the knuckle. Same little freckle by the wrist. I recognize him, I said. I just don't know which one of us he is. They didn't like that answer. They kept me separated from everyone else for hours. The detective who interviewed me said the neighbors only saw one person through the window, the one who broke the glass. But when they showed me a photo from the scene, something about the angle felt wrong. The face on the floor looked peaceful, almost relieved. Lila wouldn't look at me when they finally let us speak. She just said, "They found you standing over him." "Over who?" I asked. Her voice broke. "Over you. That was 2 days ago. I'm home now, waiting to hear if they're going to charge me with anything. They said the body's fingerprints match mine. Same dental records. Same blood type. I've tried to remember every second of that night, but the details keep shifting. Sometimes I remember hitting him. Sometimes he hit me. Sometimes I'm the one who ran. Sometimes I'm the one who stayed. When I look in the mirror, the reflection feels a half second late again. Not enough for anyone else to notice. Just enough for me to feel it. There's a noise I keep hearing at night, like a soft, even knocking somewhere in the walls. 3 times, pause. 3 times again. Lila hasn't answered my calls. Kate says she's not sleeping, that she's scared of me now. I don't blame her. I catch myself using words I don't remember choosing, standing in rooms without recalling why I walked in. This morning I found something in my jacket pocket that isn't mine. A house key with a blue tag, the kind Brandon uses. I don't know how it got there. The police said the man they found, the other me, had the same key in his pocket too. I keep thinking about what he said through the glass. "Let me in." Maybe that's what he was doing. Maybe one of us let the other in. I don't know which side of the door I'm on anymore. Story 2. I keep receiving gifts from my wife. She's been dead for 3 years. It happened on a Tuesday night. My wife had been out jogging when a drunk driver hit her head on. She was dead before she hit the ground. At least, that's what the cops told me. I moved into my parents' place for support, but no amount of help could replace Meg, the beautiful woman who had given birth to our daughter, Isla. 3 years later, I was still shaken by her death. But what happened next hurt me so much more and threatened to rip apart my sanity. It started on a frostbitten morning. I had dashed outside, late for work, and noticed a small gift in the hood of my car. What the hell? It was a tiny box wrapped in red paper. My wife had always dressed her presents in this way. I separated the wrapping from the container and found a small plastic ring inside. It was the same toy jewelry my wife had won at the fair years ago. Are my parents messing with me? I went back inside. My mother knew nothing about it. I called my dad. He didn't either. The only person I could think about was Kate, my wife's best friend from high school, after Meg and I had started dating. Kate had grown hostile, like she resented me for stealing her closest companion. When I made the call, her bitterness was evident. "Scott, long time no see." "Kate, did you leave a gift on my car this morning?" "What gift?" "A ring Meg won at the fair." "You actually think I put it there?" "It's a possibility to torment me." "Scott, we've never liked each other, but I'd never do something like that. It's crazy." Over the coming weeks, I started receiving more gifts. Each one was something only my wife and I could have known about. Gifts from past dates, oddities we'd picked up during our travels. It was all so strange. I tried ignoring them, but when one appeared at my daughter's preschool, it was too much. Someone left Mr. Fishy on my desk. Isla sobbed, curled up in my arms after class. Mr. Fishy was Mommy's favorite. She must have put it there, right, Daddy? I called the police, but they just told me, "We'll keep an eye on it. If we get any information, we'll call you." That was 2 weeks ago. Thankfully, I got a breakthrough. I dropped off Isla at school and swung by my house to pick up some tools for work. And that's when I saw it, a massive teddy bear sitting on my doorstep. It was the same one I had bought Meg during our first date at the mall 12 years ago. Who else could have known about that? Kate, she'd been there that night, shadowing us, making sure Meg and I didn't get too handsy. My mind burned with rage. I got in my car, drove across town, and waited at Kate's place. About an hour passed, and her car arrived. Kate hopped out and went to the door. "Kate!" I shouted, my voice chill in the air. "Scott!" She backed away, lips trembling. "I know the gifts are coming from you. I don't know what you're talking about. Stop lying." I showed her the teddy bear. Her face went blank. "It's not my fault. I promise." She made me do it. "Ooh, just come inside." She motioned to the house. "I'll explain everything." I followed Kate inside, and she disappeared down the hall. I was hurt and desperate for answers. So I plopped down on the couch, my eyes focused on every corner. "Meg." Kate's voice drifted into the living room. "Your husband's here." "Meg." My throat tightened as footsteps padded down the hall. I stood slowly and saw my wife, Meg, appear from around the corner, still in her jogging attire, the exact outfit she had worn during that fateful night. "I'm so happy to see you." She wrapped her arms around me. "Have you enjoyed your gifts?" I was so shocked I couldn't speak. "I'm sorry, Scott." Kate wandered in. "I should have told you as soon as she arrived." As soon as she arrived, I turned toward her, confused. "Tell me everything." After Meg's accident, I felt lost. I had to find some way to bring back a sense of my friend. And that's when I found him, the man who lives in the woods. I cast a weary glance outside her window. There was a dark forest near her property. Were those the woods she was referring to? He promised to bring her back in exchange for, well, you can probably guess. The only rule is she can't leave the house. So, she makes gifts for you and your daughter, and I deliver them. It's true. Meg smiled. She's been helping me this entire time. I shrank back, traumatized. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Didn't you think I want to know that you were alive? I'm not alive, sweetie. I'm in the in-between, neither here or there, but we can still be together. Her cold fingers cupped the sides of my face. They felt icy, frostbitten. And her eyes, there was something off about them, like I was staring into death itself. "No!" I pulled back, stepping to the door. "This is wrong." "Scott, please. You're not her." "Don't tell anyone else about this, Scott," Kate pleaded. "You'll ruin everything. Stay away from me." I ripped open the door and dashed outside. That was the last time I saw Kate. Several weeks later, I got a call. "Meet me at Kate's, 3 o'clock. It was Meg. Her voice sounded so subtle and enchanting. I fought every impulse to go over and see her, but I had to gain some sort of closure. I had to see if there was some semblance of her still inside. So I drove to Kate's after work, made sure my parents could pick up Isla from school. So I had a few good hours. When I got there and knocked, Meg answered, dressed in the same jogging outfit. "Thanks for coming." She pulled me inside. I glanced around for signs of Kate. Her car wasn't in the driveway. "Where's your housemate?" "Don't worry about her." Meg caressed the back of my neck. "It's just you and me now and Isla. I want you to bring her over so I can see her. Can you do that for me? I'm sitting in my car now, typing this on my phone. I'm not sure how to move forward. Part of me wants to tell Isla that her mother's back, but another wants to keep her safe from whatever Meg has become. What do I do?" Story 3. A man mugged me last month. He didn't take my wallet, but he took something I can never get back. I'm writing this because I have no other way to speak. The police report just says aggravated assault. They don't understand. They can't. Before all this, my voice was my life. It was more than my life. It was my purpose. Every day, I'd find a corner in this sprawling, indifferent city, and I would preach. I'm a young man, and I know how it looks. Some people would scoff. Others would hurry past. But some would listen. I never shouted fire and brimstone. I spoke of hope, of finding light in the cracks of this concrete jungle. My voice was a bell. It was strong, resonant. A gift I believe was given to me to share. I could feel the words vibrate in my chest, A physical force I could project across a busy square, cutting through the traffic and the noise to reach a person who needed to hear it. That feeling, it was like being truly alive. That all ended a month ago. It was a Tuesday. I'd finished late, my throat raw but my spirit soaring. I'd had a good day. A few people had stopped to talk, to share their burdens. I was walking home, taking a shortcut I'd taken 100 times before. It's a narrow alley, poorly lit, that spits you out a block from my apartment building. It always felt like a little secret passage, a moment of quiet between the roar of the main street and the hum of my residential block. That night, the quiet was different. It was heavy, predatory. He was just a shape in the deepest part of the shadow, halfway down the alley. I only saw him when I was almost on top of him. My first thought was of a homeless man, and my hand instinctively went to my wallet, not out of fear, but to give him what little cash I had. "God bless you, brother," I started to say. The words died in my throat. He wasn't a homeless man. He was wrong. Gone is a word, but it doesn't do him justice. It was like his skin was a size too big for the bones beneath, stretched tight over a frame that seemed impossibly thin. His eyes were just pits of shadow in the dim light. There was a smell, too, like damp, turned earth and old paper. He moved faster than I could react. One moment he was a shape, the next his hand was clamped on my arm. It was shockingly cold, a dead, bloodless cold that seeped right through my jacket. I did what anyone would do. I opened my mouth and I screamed. It was a good, solid scream, born of pure terror, full of all the power I put into my sermons. It should have echoed off the brick walls and brought people running. But it wasn't. The man, the stick figure of a person, didn't flinch. He didn't try to silence me. Instead, he leaned in, his face inches from mine. And as I screamed, he did something I still can't comprehend. He inhaled. It wasn't a normal breath. It was a deep, rattling, impossible inhalation, a vacuum. I felt it. I felt my voice, the very sound and force and vibration of it, being pulled from my lungs, torn from my throat. It was a physical sensation, like a string being yanked from the core of my being. The scream thinned, wavered, and then nothing. It was just gone. My mouth was still open. My lungs were still heaving, but there was no sound. Only a terrifying, profound silence where my voice should have been. The man straightened up, a flicker of something like satisfaction in his shadowy eyes. He didn't take my wallet. He didn't touch me again. He just released my arm, turned, and melted back into the shadows at the end of the alley. I stood there for a long time, tried to call for help, tried to make any sound at all. I could breathe, I could cough, but the part of me that made noise was just gone. It was like trying to flex a phantom limb. The machinery was there, but the signal wasn't connecting. The first few days were a blur of panic visits to doctors and specialists. I carried a small notepad and a pen everywhere. I was mugged. I screamed and my voice just stopped. They looked at me with pity. An ENT specialist threaded a camera down my nose and into my throat. He showed me the monitor. "Look," he said, pointing. "Vocal cords are perfect. No swelling, no paralysis, no nodes. Physically, there is absolutely no reason you shouldn't be able to speak." They gave it a name, conversion disorder. Severe psychological trauma manifesting as a physical symptom. My mind, they said, had been so shocked by the attack that it had switched my voice off to protect me. It was a plausible scientific explanation. It made sense to everyone but me. I went to my mentors, the older preachers who had guided me. I sat in a heavy oak chair in a quiet study, the air thick with the smell of old books, and scribbled my story onto a legal pad. They read it, their faces etched with concern. "The enemy works in many ways, my son," one of them said, his own voice a comforting baritone. "He seeks to silence the messengers of the Lord. This was a traumatic event. The shock has stolen your tongue for a time. You must have faith. Pray, rest. Let God heal your mind, and your voice will return." Psychological. Everyone agreed. I was a victim of violent crime, and my mind had broken in a specific, unusual way. I tried to believe them. I really did. I prayed. I rested. I filled notebooks with my silent sermons, but my desperate pleas to God. But I knew what I had felt. It wasn't my mind breaking. It was a theft. I felt the void inside my chest where the resonance used to be. It was a hollow space, an emptiness that ached with silence. Life became a quiet nightmare. The world felt like it was behind a pane of glass. I couldn't work. I couldn't preach. I couldn't even order a coffee without the awkward dance of pointing and writing. I was a ghost in my own life. My very identity ripped away from me. The silence was the loudest thing I had ever experienced. Then, exactly 1 week after the attack, the real horror began. I was in my apartment, trying to read. The window was open, letting in the night air and the distant sounds of the city. At first, it was just a murmur, a sound on the edge of hearing. I almost dismissed it as a car radio or a passing argument. But there was something about the cadence, something familiar. I went to the window and leaned out, listening. The sound rose and fell, carried on the wind, and then I heard it clearly, a single phrase echoing from a few streets over. And I tell you, your neighbor's compassion is a weakness you can exploit. I froze. A cold sweat prickled my entire body. It was my voice. There was no mistaking it. It was my pitch, my timbre, my particular way of drawing out certain vowels when I was making a point. It was the voice I had used every day to speak of love and forgiveness. But the words were poison. They were a vile, twisted mockery of everything I had ever preached. I grabbed my keys and ran out of the building, my heart hammering against my ribs. I sprinted down the street, chasing the sound. It seemed to be coming from a small park 2 blocks away. But by the time I got there, breathless and frantic, there was nothing. Just a few people walking their dogs, a couple on a bench. The park was quiet. The voice was gone. I tried to tell myself I was hallucinating. Auditory hallucination, a symptom of the trauma. That's what the doctors would say. My mind was playing tricks on me, creating a phantom of my lost voice. It made sense. But the next night, it happened again. This time it was closer. It sounded like it was coming from the rooftop of the building across the street. I stood at my window, listening, my blood turning to ice. Look upon the desperate and see not a soul to be saved, but a tool to be used. Their hope is a currency, and you should spend it freely. It was my voice, but it was being used to preach a gospel of pure, undiluted evil. It spoke of selfishness as a virtue, of cruelty as a strength. It was a sermon from hell, delivered with the same passionate, convincing tone I had once used to bring comfort to the lost. I watched the rooftop for half an hour, but saw no one. The voice just preached its filth into the night air, and then, as if a switch had been flipped, it stopped. Every night after that, it got closer. One night, it was from the alley behind my building. The next, it was from the street corner right below my window. I'd rushed down, but there was never anyone there. It was a ghost. I was starting to unravel. I wasn't sleeping. I'd sit in the dark, by the window, waiting, dreading the moment I'd hear myself start to speak. My friends and mentors from the church were checking on me. I'd try to explain, scribbling frantically on my notepad. I can hear my voice. Someone is using it. It's saying terrible things. They'd share those same looks of pity. It's the trauma, they'd say gently. Your mind is trying to process what happened. Perhaps it's a manifestation of your anger, of your fear. They thought I was losing my mind. And to be honest, I was starting to believe them. Was this my new reality? Trapped in silence, haunted by a twisted version of myself? Last night, I decided I couldn't live like that. Crazy or not, I had confronted. When the voice started up, closer than ever before, seemingly from the very same alley where I'd lost it, I didn't hesitate. I grabbed the heaviest flashlight I owned and went out to face my ghost. The alley looked exactly the same, and the voice, it was here. It was loud, bouncing off the walls, a torrent of beautiful, persuasive, horrific words. For true power lies not in lifting others up, but in the certainty that you can push them down. It was coming from the far end of the alley, and as I crept closer, my flashlight beam cutting a nervous path through the gloom, I saw him. It was the same gaunt man, the same scarecrow figure. He wasn't alone. He had someone cornered, a young woman pressed back against the brick wall. She was staring up at him, her eyes wide, but not with terror. It was more like fascination. She was mesmerized. The voice was pouring out of him, but his lips weren't moving in sync with the words. It was like a badly dubbed movie. The sound, my sound, was emanating from his chest, a perfect, seamless broadcast of my stolen voice, twisted to his purpose. My blood ran cold, but then a different fire ignited in its place. Righteous anger, the kind of fire I used to channel into my sermons. I am a shepherd, and this was a wolf among the flock. He saw me then. The flashlight beam caught his face, and his hollow eyes locked onto mine. The voice cut off abruptly, plunging the alley into a sudden, shocking silence. The woman blinked, as if waking from a dream, and a flicker of real fear finally crossed her face. The gaunt man tilted his head. He didn't seem surprised to see me. A dry, rasping sound, like dead leaves skittering across pavement, escaped his throat. It might have been a chuckle. Then he spoke, and this time the voice was his own. It was a whisper. You came back. The fire in you is strong. It seasons the sound. He knew. He was talking to me, but he seemed to understand my silent questions. I took a step forward, raising the flashlight like a club. I didn't know what I was going to do. I just knew I couldn't let him hurt that woman. You wonder how? He rasped, his eyes never leaving mine. It's a gift. I take the instruments of conviction. The preacher's sermon, the politician's promise, the lover's whisper. I drink the sound, and I use the leftover faith to draw them in. He gestured with his chin toward the woman, who was now trembling. They hear a voice they want to believe. They come closer. Their walls come down. It makes the rest so much easier. I had no voice to shout a warning. I had no words to condemn him. All I had was my conviction. In a single, desperate motion, I did the only thing I could. I threw myself at him. I'm not a big man, and he was unnaturally strong, but the surprise of the attack was enough. I slammed into him, and we both went down in a tangle of limbs. Run. I mouthed at the woman, a silent, desperate scream. For a second she was frozen, and then her survival instinct kicked in. She scrambled away, her footsteps echoing down the alley as she fled into the night. I felt a flash of triumph. It was short-lived. The thief threw me off him with an effortless, terrifying strength. I landed hard against the brick wall. The air knocked out of me. Before I could recover, he was on top of me, one of his cold, skeletal hands wrapped around my throat. He leaned down, his face once again inches from mine. The foul, earthy smell was overwhelming. A pointless gesture, he hissed, his voice a dry rustle in the dark. Your flock is scattered, and the shepherd is about to be devoured. His grip tightened, and I felt my consciousness start to slip. He was laughing, that same dead leaf sound, and then he opened his mouth. I will see it in my nightmares for the rest of my life. However long that may be, it wasn't a mouth anymore. It stretched, unhinged, widened, the flesh pulling and distorting in a way that defied all physics, all biology. It kept opening wider and wider, until his entire head seemed to be nothing but a gaping maw, a perfect circle of absolute, starless black. It was a hole in the world. I could hear a faint, high-pitched ringing coming from it, a sound that seemed to pull at the very edges of my soul. He was lowering this void down over my face, and I knew, with a certainty that went beyond terror, that he was going to consume me, not just my body, but everything I was. And then, a sound of a siren cut through the darkness. It started faint and far away, but it grew louder, closer, wailing through the night. The thief froze. The black hole of his mouth receded, snapping back into the shape of a thin, bloodless line. A look of pure annoyance crossed his gaunt features, with a final, contemptuous hiss. He released my throat, scrambled to his feet, and was gone. He didn't run. He just faded into the deepest shadows at the end of the alley and vanished. I lay there, gasping, dragging in ragged, silent breaths, as a police car screeched to a halt at the mouth of the alley. The woman I'd saved had found them. Of course, they didn't believe the real story. They found me battered and bruised, and the victim hysterical. To them, It was just a mugging gone wrong, an attempted assault. The woman tried to explain about the voice, about how she felt like she was in a trance, but they just nodded and wrote it down as a symptom of shock. When they asked me for my statement, all I could do was pull out my little notepad. They called in a psychologist from the Victim Services Unit. They were kind, they were professional, and they were completely useless. So here I am. My throat is bruised, but the doctors say I'll be fine. Physically, my voice has not returned. I know it won't. It's still out there with him. I'm writing this because I'm a preacher, and a preacher's job is to spread the word. This is my new pulpit. This is my new sermon. That thing is still out there. He's hunting in my city, and he's using my voice to do it. He might be hunting in yours, too. So please, I beg you, listen. If you're walking home at night, and you hear a voice from a dark street, a voice that sounds impossibly trustworthy, impossibly convincing, a voice that speaks of hope, but makes you feel a creeping dread, run. Don't listen. Don't let the words take root, because it might be a politician's promise, or a lover's whisper, or it might be mine. Story 4. The children's costumes are getting worse every Halloween. One thing to know about me, I love Halloween. Always have, always will. Every October, I spend thousands making sure my house is the spookiest on the block. The decorations put even some of the local haunted houses to shame. Though I make sure not to go too crazy. Don't want another HOA citation. I also give out the best treats. King's Eyes candy bars. That's right, King's Eyes. It's no wonder so many trick-or-treaters come crowding outside my door each year. But of course, they'll have to earn it first. So many kids nowadays don't take Halloween seriously, throwing on last-minute costumes just to feed their sugar fix and rot their teeth out. You only get so many Halloweens before people start saying you're too old. And these brats are wasting them. Don't they know that some people would kill to be that age again? Young. Young like the girl currently ringing my doorbell. Quick or thweet? She lisps between two missing front teeth while lifting up her treat bag. She can't be older than 6, and her costume isn't really much of one at all. Just an ordinary child's romper that cuts off above her terribly scraped up knees, like she'd fallen on the way here. I feign a smile of my own. Now aren't you a cutie? Were you so excited to go trick-or-treating that you forgot to put on your costume, dear? The child freezes. You don't recognize me? I look her over again. Maybe she's dressed as a character from some TV show she likes. Still doesn't change the fact that it's an awful costume. Boring. Like those wise kids who think it's a good idea to dress up as someone from the office. A good costume should be eye-catching regardless of whether someone gets the reference or not. I'm sorry, hon. I really don't. Before I can shoo her off my porch, I notice tears welling up in her big green eyes. For heaven's sake, really? Reluctantly, I reach out to comfort her, and she grabs my arm with strength uncanny for someone her size. An ugly, guttural sound emanates from her throat as she chokes back sobs. But you, she sniffles, I'm past. I can't make out the rest. Past what? Past the age to be making a scene on someone's porch? Speaking of, where is this girl's parents? I search for them in the evening gloom, and am instead greeted with a sight most unwelcome. Trick or treat. Choruses a new batch of children. Great. More of them. Normally, more trick-or-treaters would be a good thing. But the 10 or so kids now marching up to me were some of the cheapest, most half-assed costumes I've seen all night. Bedsheet ghosts, pirates, donning nothing but a paper hat and an eye patch, a Dracula with only a blanket cape and candy fangs. Smell my feet. But all of that pales compared to the one leading the pack. A girl barely in her teens, wearing nothing more than leggings and a stained shirt. In one hand holds a pillowcase to stow her treats, and in the other, a coffee mug for some godforsaken reason. Upon climbing the last step, she flashes me the most insufferable grin, finishing the song with, "Give me something good to eat." That does it. Everything starts to go red, and my blood boils. Anyone who can't be bothered to dress up properly for Halloween deserves nothing. Maddeningly enough, the adolescent has the audacity to look confused at what I said. She doesn't recognize us, cries the first little girl, still latched onto my arm. In my anger, I'd forgotten her. And wait, did she say us? Were they together? I inspect the little girl and the older one, noting that they share the same sage green eyes. One's not too different from my own, actually. Maybe they're sisters. Whatever the case, the teen somehow draws meaning from the outburst, and her arrogant smirk slips back into place. Oh, but I'm wearing a costume. Oh, really now? I snort. Yep, you see I'm you. But from the... let me guess. The future? The girl's eyes widen. The present. I'm you in the present, she finishes lamely. She's even trembling a bit. Ha! She must not have expected me to see through her ruse so easily, paper thin as it was, and had to pivot to an even more pathetic excuse. Like, really now? Me from the present? We aren't even wearing the same thing. What would me costumed as a Red Queen from Alice, and her as a soccer mom, going off the fact that her treat bag isn't empty. That little trick might have worked on the other bimbos that lived around her. But me, I have standards. The teen quickly recovers. Come on, lady, don't be a Scrooge. What will you do with all that candy, if not give it to us? Maybe I'll have it all to myself, I retort. Her green eyes lock onto my own. You won't live very long with a diet like that. My rebuttal dies on my lips as I finally become aware of the other trick-or-treaters, the juvenile mob still silent behind her, and how their eyes, wide as saucers, seem mesmerized by the candy dish in my hand. Drool trickles from their mouths, running down cheap plastic masks and over-painted faces. Greedy little fingers jerk and spasm, forming claws ready to shred anything that stands in the way of their covetous sweets. My blood turns cold, and I feel the urge to rush back inside and away from these little monsters, slam the door in their faces. And I try, but the little girl has my arm in a death grip. I can't budge an inch. Desperately, I search for something, anything, that can get me out of the situation, and spot a lone figure shambling towards us. Now that's what I call a costume. I shout, pointing behind them. A couple of the delinquents manage to tear their eyes away from the candy dish long enough to follow my finger, and what follows after they lay eyes on the newcomer? Screams. At first it's just one, high and blood-curdling, sharp enough to split the nightly air in half. And then like dominoes, the others turn around, first to the screamer, then to the cause of the screaming, and fall into the chorus until all the blocks seem to be filled with their terror. Not that it's completely unjustified. It is one hell of a costume. The newcomer is a girl of indiscriminate age, being impossible to tell from underneath her costume, through what must be an ingenious use of makeup and prosthetics. The new girl appears as if she's being eaten alive, or more accurately, gnawed to death by a horde of vermin. A soiled, ragged dress reveals even raggedier flesh shot through countless wounds oozing with congealed blood, and clustered around each one are ants, cockroaches, centipedes, posed to look like they're burrowing inside the girl, tunneling, hollowing her from the inside out, a living, walking hive. It must have cost a fortune. As the new girl shambles up the porch, the other kids back far away from her, some of them fleeing outright. The only exception, surprisingly enough, is the first little girl, who seems entirely unfazed by the gruesome costume. Still, it serves enough of a distraction for me to slip free from her grasp. Rubbing away the soreness in my arm, I turn to the newcomer with my first genuine smile of the night. Hey there, sweetie. I love your costume. No words pass through the girl's scarred lips. Her only response is a silent stare, dull and one-eyed, as the other eye is a ruined bloody mess with bugs burrowing through the socket. Talk about staying in character. I scoop a handful of candy into her palm, a palm attached to a hand that looks like a Rottweiler's chew toy. The flesh on her pinky has been entirely gnawed off, exposing bone, and from it dangles a small black rat, hanging on by its teeth buried into the bone. Another rubber prop, I assume. That is, until I see the thing twitch. I shriek, jumping back, causing the candy dish to slip out of my hands and into the bushes below. The girl doesn't react in any matter, still as a grave, and so is the rat, just as lifeless. Neither now does the rat biting into her hand. If it had ever actually moved in the first place, I must be more shaken up in that close call earlier than I thought. My cheeks burned bright in embarrassment. I'll go get some more candy, Han. Be right back. I dive back inside, heading for the cellar where I keep the leftover Halloween candy. It's dark inside the cellar. The stale air is paradoxically both dusty and humid. I rarely come down here. I'll have to hire a cleaner. The lone, naked light bulb sputters enough light to barely make out the far wall. I walk over to a box labeled Halloween Leftovers in fat black Sharpie. As I reach to grab it off the shelf, I notice the date scrawled under it. It's not from last year, but from 4 Halloweens ago. And yet somehow, the box feels oddly heavy, oddly full. Slowly, I open the top flaps and am immediately sent gagging from the stench of spoiled milk and fermented sugar. No. This won't do. This won't do at all. I'm hiring that cleaner first thing in the morning. When the noxious fumes have finally left my lungs, the tears they sprung blinked away. I realize in dawning horror that this is not a one-time blunder. Deeper into the cellar, lining the walls, are entire shelves of old Halloween leftovers. Like the first, each box is marked with date, revealing an entire mausoleum of spoiled sweets, a sugary graveyard. How could there be so much of it? Did I really hand out so few treats each Halloween? Perhaps I should lower my standards. Just a bit, walking down the aisle, I notice underneath the sound of creaking floorboards a grating warble. I can't pinpoint the source it's effusive, seemingly emanating from all around me. It grows louder as I walk farther in, to the point where it sets on my teeth on edge. I'll have to remember to hire an electrician as well. Obviously, the wiring is faulty. At the end of the room, I finally reach a box marked as last year's goodies. Unlike the other one, this one is taped up, requiring me to scratch off the corners of the tape on the sides to open it. The candy inside still looks edible, though the wrappers are a little sticky. This should suffice. I'm lifting it up when the largest cockroach I've ever seen darts from behind the shelf. I yelp, stumbling back into an adjacent shelf hard enough that the box holds tips over, drenching me in a saccharine emulsion of spoiled chocolate and melted taffy. Yuck! My beautiful costume ruined. And I don't even want to think about getting this out of my hair. Even removing my now soiled dress doesn't help much. The sugary goop seep right through it and onto my skin where it adheres like a candy crust. Double yuck. While I'm picking myself off the floor, I notice something in the corner of my vision. Propped up on a lower shelf is a book, a photo album of my childhood, conspicuously already open to a page in the middle. I recognize the photo instantly. It was taken 20-some years ago, depicting me fresh out of kindergarten. I remember the day well, of course. I had fallen off a swing set, landing face first, knocked out my 2 front teeth, and got scraped up real bad. A small part of me thinks it a little messed up that my parents would put this in the album. A much larger part of me is consumed with the realization that the bawling girl in the photo is the spitting image of the little girl I'd met earlier, the one missing her front teeth. Unbidden, her words pop into my head. When I asked about her costume, I'm past. PSD, that's what she meant. She's me from the past. Baffling choice and get up aside. There's absolutely no way she could have seen this photo, having been down here collecting dust all these years. Even I had long forgotten about it, and like some great horrendous machine churning to life, my brain begins to turn, begins to make other connections as well, like about the older girl who claimed to be me from the present and how, with my costume taken off, I noticed that my underclothes are the exact same. Even the coffee stain from when I spilled my latte during my rush to find batteries for the animatronic skeleton. Okay, so there's one girl dressed up as a me of the past, another as a me in present. Did that mean there was one more girl? The me of the future? For some reason, the thought brings chills. I mentally replay the night's events in my head, and can't come up with anyone that could fit the bill. Maybe they don't exist. Maybe there is no third, weird little girl with an eerily accurate costume. Or maybe I just haven't met them yet, having gone inside before they could arrive. If I was to go back outside as originally planned, would I get to meet her? Maybe she's already out on that porch, right now. Would I even want to? To meet this me from the future? The thought is morbidly tantalizing, like standing on the edge of a cliff. inexorable as gravity. I shake the thoughts out of my head. This is stupid, with this Halloween being a bust. The only thing I'm going to do is turn my lights off early and get this candy off me by way of a long hot shower. Picking myself up, I dust myself off. Or try to anyway. The gummy sweets adhere too strongly to my skin and clothes to brush off. Definitely going to need that shower. I make my way to exit, but when I try the door, it refuses to budge, because of course it wouldn't. Guess I'll have to hire a locksmith too. I never should have come down here. I shoot a text to my maid, who has a spare key in my house. 2 minutes later, and still no response. Just because you're on your day off doesn't mean you can't pick up your calls. Martha. Good grief. For a second, I debate calling 911, but ultimately decide against it. It's not really an emergency. Besides, I don't want to give any of those terminally bored housewives I'm unfortunate to call neighbors anything more to gawk at. Decision made. I plop down on the floor, determined to wait until the maid sees my text, or, at the very worst, when she undoubtedly finds me at 6 a.m. tomorrow when she reports in for work. But as the minutes while away in this dusty cellar, the night's events and revelations begin to gnaw at me. I realize that I'm breathing way too fast. Try to do some breath exercises. Doesn't work. I heard once that journaling can be calming. Hence this little story I wrote on my phone. Recounting the strange series of events from start to finish, it helps a little, I think. I'm still debating whether I should actually post it or not. On one hand, I'm not much for strangers prying into my business. But on the other, commiserating with strangers on the shittiness today's generation of kids could very much be what I need to get through this even shittier situation. In the midst of my typing, the buzzing sounds reach a peak, taking on a new form that sounds almost like chittering, a cacophonous noise coming from all around me. I lift my eyes and am met with hundreds more, belonging to a horde of vermin. In every direction lies ants and roaches and rats, all grotesquely fat from years of gorging on spoiled sweets, and I can tell from the way they look at my sugar-saturated form. Their appetite isn't quite sated yet. Their ravenous gaze brings to mind the kids still waiting on my porch. All of them had that same hungry look. Well, all except one. The last girl in the impressively made costume. I had seen something almost sad in her one remaining eye. An eye of sage green, just like my own. I'm already onto my feet, pounding on the door, before I realize the scream tearing out my throat. Noticed only through the burning of vocal cords shredding themselves against each other. The sound itself doesn't even reach my own ears, drowned out as it is by the scuttling of thousands of clawed feet and the chittering of gnashing teeth. I don't dare look back, vision narrowing solely to the door in front of me, and how it can't be locked because the knob turns and yet it won't. Fucking move. I fumble around with my phone, madly shaking legs to get bugs and worse from crawling up them, and turn on the flashlight. Glued stuck within the door hinges is some gummy substance. Old taffy. Desperate, I try clawing off, but recoil when I feel a sharp pain in my hand. I lift my hand up to the phone's light. Dangling off my pinky is a small, mottled black rat. It had bit me right down to the bone. Story 5. I saw something in my chemistry lab at night, and now I can't wait to go to school on Monday. I'm taking a ton of chemistry over summer break, like 4 classes. All I can think about every day is how much I wish I were back at my parents', spending my days lounging around or studying stuff I actually want to study, and not stuck in a lab, stooping over a burette doing my 20 titration that week. It's not all that bad, though, for the first half of the summer. All I have are labs every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. It's not until July that the difficulty ramps up and my last semblance of free time goes on vacation. But that's not important. The chemistry lab is fairly efficiently set up. All the students have their own drawer full of glassware with everything they need. The system isn't perfect, but I've been fastidious about making sure that if I borrow extra glassware from reserve, I return it when I'm done. I noticed fairly quickly that there was something odd going on. Every time I pulled out the equipment needed for that day's lab, all the pieces had already been labeled. The writing was really messy, but trying to write on a non-Euclidean surface is tricky, and hey, less work for me. The first time I noticed this, I had assumed that it was leftovers from the spring session. That assumption was challenged immediately in the next lab, when all the labels had been changed to fit the chemicals we were using. Stuff like sulfuric acid and sodium hydroxide are standard and can easily be explained away as leftovers from spring, even if they were always updated to the concentrations we were using. But some of the very specific chemicals used absolutely could not, especially the ones that were used once the entire semester. Before I start explaining how I figured out there's not another chem lab, I should mention that my roommate and I carpool together. I only have the one class, but she's taking a bunch of classes. In fact, for some reason my chemistry lab and her anatomy lab are connected by a room full of chemicals and chemical disposal. No clue why the two are connected, but chemistry and biology share a floor in this building, so it's not totally out of place. Whenever I have to dump something to disposal, I stick my head in and wave at her. Anyway, because of the carpool situation, I end up spending a lot of time on campus with no schoolwork. I don't mind this since I am currently going to take the JLPT in the future, and I don't concentrate well at home, so the extra time to work is somewhat appreciated. We usually get there at around 8:30 and leave at 5:30. I hang around the labs because it's quiet and the chairs are comfortable. This is how I know there's absolutely no morning class. Any night class would temporarily be unable to correctly label my equipment because they'd be doing a lab I had already done that day. Also, my class ran on a 3-day schedule, so that kind of ruined the possibility of class running on the days we weren't there. One day, one of my classmates mentioned the labels, and I wanted to hug her. I never brought it up out of fear of sounding absolutely insane, so seeing others notice it made me feel so much better. I told her about my deductions, paraphrase and not ramble, and a TA who was listening and chimed in and told us there were absolutely no other classes held in this lab, and that it was all just left over from spring. I told him about the labels changing, and he just shrugged. I later pulled up the software you use to enroll in classes, and when I searched for another summer chemistry class, sure enough, he was right. This was the only session of this class running this summer. While I spent time pondering this, I wouldn't say that it consumed me. Sure, it was weird, but I mostly just liked the convenience. That all changed one day when I pulled a beaker out of my drawer and saw 0.1 phosphoric acid written on the label. My blood ran cold. That was my handwriting. I write the lowercase letter D in a very distinctive way. It looks more like the quarter note you see on sheet music than a letter. I absolutely did not write this. Never mind the fact that we hadn't used phosphoric acid in the lab before today. I would never write out the concentration unless it mattered. Who or what had written this? I looked at it closely and realized that it was not an exact one-to-one match for my handwriting. It was too practiced. I could see slight differences in the curves of the letters, and the space in between them was just a little bit too far apart. If anyone else had seen this, they would probably think it was mine. It was actually more uncanny when I stared at it closer, noticing how closely the writer had tried to mimic my penmanship. A sudden realization hit me, and I pulled out my phone with sweaty hands. I prayed I would be wrong. I had been taking at least one picture of every lab to send to my boyfriend back home. In all of these pictures, the labels were legible. I looked at the first picture, and the writing was still messy and totally distinct from mine. As I swiped through the photos, I felt like I was going to be sick. As the photos got closer to the present time, the writing on the labels got closer and closer to my own handwriting. It was slow. First, it was the way the arches on the letter M changed from vaguely jagged to very smooth, just like mine. Then the spacing got closer together. The little details slowly culminated into Monday's photo. That writing, omitting the letter D, had mimicked mine as closely as the writer could. I zoomed in and noticed that the letter D was smudged, like the writer had tried to write the way I do, but gave up and did it like they normally would. I looked around the classroom and noticed several classmates staring at their glassware the same way I was. I did that day's lab with a sense of foreboding. I tried to concentrate on my work, but handling the glassware with the mimicked writing on it was making me feel ill. So eventually I tore it off and labeled it myself. As soon as class was over, I ran through the connecting room and told my roommate that I was going to stay at school for a while, so she could just go home without me and I would take an Uber back. She asked why. I had just complained about being bored now that I was done with my Japanese workbooks, and I muttered something about wanting to hang out with a new friend. Her eyes lit up. She had been trying to cure me of my terminal asociality for a while, always telling me to talk to more people and make new friends. I felt incredibly bad, but what could I possibly say? I was investigating a serial laborer who had my handwriting. She would have me committed. So I lied and quickly cut the conversation short to hang out with my new friend. I ended up hiding in the depths of the library. I felt ridiculous having to hide, but if lying felt bad, then having to lie more about why I wasn't hanging out with my new friend would feel worse. I didn't make my way back to the lab building until I got a text from her asking how I was doing and that she had ordered delivery, so I should get something on the way home. The building the labs are in technically never closes. I had a classmate last semester who was always tired because he manned the front desk at 3 in the morning. This may not have been the case in the summer, but this building was so large and empty on the upper floors that I could find a place to hide if need be. I did end up hiding, but it was a half-hearted attempt. There was a nook in the lobby that was easily visible from the stairs, but if someone took the elevator, and most people do, they would not see me at all. There was a table in this nook, but I sat on the floor, back up against the windows that stretched from the ceiling to the floor. I was unsure when the rider would come in, so past 6:30, I half-heartedly played solitaire on my phone and strained my ears to hear if the elevator would ping signaling that someone was arriving. Around 7 o'clock, a different class slowly started trickling in, and they all went down the hall opposite to where my lab was. So no luck there. The only guy who took the stairs regarded me with a strange look as he walked by. But that was the only interaction I had with that class. When the class let out at 8:30 and all the students left, the third floor was stiflingly quiet. I felt like I could hear the blood flowing in my ears. The suffocating silence lasted for hours. It was about midnight when I really needed to pee. I hadn't heard the elevator, and no one had come up the stairs, so I decided to very quickly relieve myself. When I got up and started heading towards the women's bathrooms, I noticed that the laboratory's lights were on, which was so strange I forgot about the reason why I got up in the first place. The lights in the common areas were always on, but the labs were almost always dark. I peeked into the window of the lab as discreetly as I could. I wasn't sure what I was expecting to see, but it was certainly not the sight in front of me. At first, I thought I was looking at the anatomy models from the connected lab. They looked like humans, sort of, except just like anatomy models. You could see their organs. Each one of them had a different piece of them exposed. One had a large hole in its chest, heart rhythmically beating like the absence of a rib cage, and skin didn't bother at all. Another had a hole in its abdomen. I watched its intestines writhe in the open air. The worst one didn't have a face. It looked like someone had taken a human head and put it through one of those slicers you see at a deli counter, with no lower jaw, its half-formed tongue lolled out of its underdeveloped mouth, and so much drool constantly ran down its neck and onto a shirt, my shirt. I had been so distracted by the exposed organs that I didn't even look at their faces closely. It was just like the handwriting. They were almost perfectly identical to the faces of my classmates, assuming you didn't look too hard. But when you did look hard, you noticed that little defects started piling up. Eyes spaced too far apart, a nose that was just a bit too much to the left. One of them seemed to have more teeth than humanly possible. I was glad that, for some reason, my doppelganger didn't have a face. I can get past the bleeding flesh and exposed organs, but I knew that if I saw my own face, just ever so slightly off, I would dream about it every day for the rest of my life. The fact that they were completely silent just made it worse. Every time I watched them pantomime talking to each other, I felt my skin crawl. Their gestures and social interactions were so stiff that even someone as socially oblivious as I could tell, it was like they were acting out conversation, like they'd only seen it on TV. I watched them perform the Future Lab in a trance. I felt absolutely rooted to the spot. The trance and the silence were broken by the sound of shattering glass. The guy who sits across from me's double, I think his name is Marvin, had accidentally shattered a burette, just like with real people. Every one of those things stopped what they were doing for a second to see what caused the noise. They all stared a bit too long before going back to their work. I watched as my faceless double walked over to help with a strange stiffness to her gait. I didn't stay to see what else was going to happen. They hadn't acknowledged me, but clearly they react to external stimuli, and I wasn't sticking around to see if they noticed me eventually. The rest of the night went by in a blur. I sprinted out of the building and got an Uber home. Even though it was very late when I finally made it to my bed and I was dead tired, I couldn't fall asleep. My brain kept running through what I saw in the lab and coming up with question after question that I tried to answer through the internet to no avail. I was still awake when the sun came up and I heard my roommate leave to go to class. I had been frantically reading about the history of my school, the current faculty, folklore about creatures that looked like you, and had come up completely empty-handed. Eventually, my lizard brain took over and told me it was time to sleep. My dreams were a muddled mess full of unfinished humans and the burning smell of vaporized acid. I didn't sleep very long, maybe 4 hours. When I awoke, I saw I had several texts from my boyfriend wondering why I hadn't talked to him last night like I usually did. I wanted to tell someone about what I saw, and he was the person most likely to believe me. But I just couldn't think of a way to start. I had photographic evidence of the handwriting change. But I didn't take a picture of those things last night. I was simply so overwhelmed by the sight of it all that it never occurred to me. I told him I was feeling very sick and that I wanted to talk to him really late tomorrow night. I told him that what I would tell him would sound absolutely insane and that he should prepare himself. Then I muted the conversation, not wanting to talk to anyone, and instead be alone with my thoughts. Since the internet had no answers for me, I went to the library. If there was a disgraced former professor who dabbled in making whatever those things are, then there was sure to be some sort of old newspaper article about them. Perhaps it was a story the university wanted covered up, or it was so old it never made it to the internet. Either way, I was going to find it. Many hours later, I had been asked to leave the library by a kindly librarian who looked like she wanted to say something about the dark circles under my eyes, but obeyed the laws of social niceties and didn't. My search had been fruitless. There were plenty of disgraced professors and breaches of ethics, but they were all of the mundane variety. When I got home, I told my roommate I would be going to class on my own, shoved some goldfish down my throat, and fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. At the lab the next day, I didn't even bother to open my drawer, and instead used pieces from the reserve drawer. I was having difficulties focusing, not only because being in this room made me feel like there was something under my skin. I also had a feeling of deja vu so strong it was starting to make me nauseous. I had watched those things do this exact lab the other night, but pay attention to the other students around me. I noticed that the way they behaved was actually identical to the way those things did. Now that I had thought about it, my double, even with no face, had seemed to be glancing around the room, deep in thought. Actually, when I first stumbled upon the class, it was early into the lab. Aside from the fact that she had no face, my double had stood out to me early on because she had been rushing around the room, grabbing things. I hadn't connected the dots that she was me at that point and paid it no mind. Surely she hadn't been grabbing equipment from the reserves. I had already not wanted to open my drawer, and with this dawning realization, I wanted to open it even less. I had to, though, just like with the handwriting, if I never had the opportunity to debunk my own idea, it would eat away at me. I slowly opened my drawer and I saw the label I had put on the phosphoric acid beaker from last lab, which simply read Phos. I wanted to scream, to run out of the lab, and never return to this university. This thing, double, whatever it was, had acted out my movements before I had even made them. It had been grabbing glassware from the reserves before I even saw it. How is this possible? If it were just mimicking how I act, it wouldn't have done that. How could it predict that I would be so intrigued by the mimic handwriting that I would camp in the building to catch whatever was doing it? The only possibility in my mind is that it was acting out the future, but I absolutely refuse to believe it. The shattering of glass caused a low murmur conversation in the lab to go quiet, and we all cast a quick glance at Marvin, who looked embarrassed and tried to cover his embarrassment by cleaning up the glass from the burette he had just broken. I stayed in my seat. My double had gone over to help, but I wouldn't. One act of defiance could possibly cause this whole nightmare to disappear is what I hoped. I would stay absolutely rooted to this chair or die trying, and then my left leg moved, followed by my right leg. I felt like a marionette being pulled forward by invisible strings. I fought against it and tensed my body up, but even still, I hobbled over to Marvin. I remembered in a daze how stiffly my double had been walking, and wondered briefly if I had stumbled across some sort of omnipotent being who was toying with me for its amusement. Marvin did not look confused by my awkward walk and look of terror on my face. In fact, he looked completely indifferent to my presence. Before he could say anything, my body started picking up the shards of broken glass on the floor. Whatever was controlling me was clumsy. Instead of lightly picking the glass up to avoid getting injured, I picked it up with all the force in my fingers, like a toddler who hasn't realized they can vary the amount of strength in their hands. Immediately, I felt the glass tear into my fingertips. When I was done picking up a piece, I deposited it into my free hand, which quickly formed a tight fist around it in order not to drop it. I watched helplessly as blood oozed from both my hands and dripped onto the floor. Again and again, I was forced to pick up the glass. It probably didn't take much time, but every piece felt like it took centuries to pick up. When I was finally done, my body threw the glass into the broken glassware bin, and I regained control of it. I looked at my hands. I could see tiny pieces of glass embedded in my palm and fingers. I had been silently crying the whole time, and now that I had control again, I had started to cry more audibly. Marvin seemingly could not hear my cries, and awkwardly thanked me the same way you thank any classmate you don't know very well. I went back to my bench and went back to work. Even though I was bleeding profusely, no one seemed to care. I forced myself to do things as normally as possible out of fear that control would be taken away from me again, even though that meant further grinding tiny particles of glass deeper into my fingers as I worked the burette, causing blood to fall into the solution and ruining any possible results, even though it meant washing out the glassware and leaving it dirtier before. By the end of the lab, I was feeling woozy, but just exiting the room made me feel significantly better. The first thing I did was grab some paper towels from the bathroom and wrap my hands in them before taking a painful drive to the closest CVS and purchasing first aid supplies. The cashier looked concerned about my hands as the paper towels had gotten soaked through on the drive-in. He started to ask me if I was okay, and I told him I didn't want to talk about it. Have you ever tried to dig tiny particles of glass out of your finger with your non-dominant hand in the driver's seat of your Toyota Camry? Not only was it already a difficult task, it was made even more difficult by the fact that operating the tweezers was painful. I don't know how long I sat there doing that. Every time I thought I had gotten it all out, I found another piece. I considered going to the hospital, but even if I didn't have a prior history, I couldn't come up with an explanation for the wounds that wouldn't land me in a psychiatric hospital. After I shot that idea down, I considered driving somewhere scenic and letting myself bleed out. I knew I had lost a lot of blood. I felt positively cold on this scalding June afternoon. But eventually, after I dug out as much of the glass as I could, I wrapped my hands in bandages and headed back to the university. If I could just get a picture of these things and convince a few others to believe me, maybe someone would face consequences. Next week was the last week of class, and I was certain that those things had some sort of objective, and the end of the class would signal for them to start whatever it was they were created for. At the time, I felt like I absolutely had to press on for fear of running out of time. But now I think it would have been better to just forget about it and accept whatever was going to happen to me was a punishment for interrupting the natural order of things. When I got back to campus, I ate as much food as I could and lay down in my hiding spot after setting alarms at midnight and every 15 minutes after. I slept like a rock. Even the pain in my hands couldn't overcome my deep slumber. I slept through the first 2 alarms before the 12:30 alarm successfully roused me. While I was still half asleep and walking toward the lab, all the drowsiness left my body when I saw that the lab light was on. I peeked into the lab, and when I thought it couldn't get worse, it had. Those holes they had in their body, they were getting smaller. My double had a forehead now, and I could see the corners of her eyes on the side of her face. The little abnormalities in everyone's faces were slightly less anomalous. Eyes were closer. Noses were more centered. The one with too many teeth now had the correct number of teeth, but they were slightly too large. I felt on the verge of passing out. I absolutely needed to get this photo. I discreetly held my phone up to the window, making sure it was silenced in case they reacted to the shutter sound, and was about to take a photo when something unexpected happened. My double had been carrying a flask full of something in her bandaged hands to her bench when she tripped. I couldn't see anything she could have possibly tripped on. It's like her ankle gave out. As she fell, she hit the side of her incomplete head on the sharp corner of the lab counter and spilled whatever was in the flask all over her. I watched her flesh sizzle as the chemicals ate away at it, and as blood gushed out the side of her head and pooled on the ground. She twitched and writhed in agony, all the while letting out a silent, mouthless scream. All the doubles came over to see what was happening, and a few tried to help her, but as the pool of blood grew larger and larger and her twitching became weaker and weaker, nothing could be done, and my double finally lay still, chemicals still eating their way through her rapidly cooling body. I can't remember exactly what happened after that. I took the picture and called my boyfriend on the way home. I don't know if he thinks I'm insane or pranking him, but the desperation in my voice at least convinced him to drive to my apartment that night. It's now Saturday morning. I'm thankful that, at the very least, I have the weekend to try something to avoid ending up like my double. I don't know who to go to for help. The police aren't any help. When I try to talk to them, my frenzy was so palpable that after an officer heard me out, I later heard him say something into his radio about a psych evaluation. He wouldn't even let me show him the photos, insisting that he had heard enough and would send someone to check out. I left the station as soon as I could. The rational side of me knew that being locked away in a place with 24/7 surveillance was probably the best solution. Yet for some reason, I knew I absolutely couldn't be locked away. It wasn't out of fear of dying or of losing control of my body again. No, it was out of the fear of missing out on something spectacular. It was the same fear that grips the hearts of children when their parents tell them that if they don't stop misbehaving, the trip to Disneyland will be canceled. I lie now in bed, my face contorting with two very different emotions. I am both petrified and absolutely elated, my sobbing flipping to gleeful laughter, and back to sobbing in mere moments. I am locked in here. My boyfriend and roommate barricaded the door when my behavior started to become a danger to them. Occasionally, if I spend more than a minute sobbing, my boyfriend quickly rushes in and tries to talk to me. It never works. I always end up crying harder when I see the deep gashes my fingernails left his face. I felt as if I had been detached from my body. Whatever thoughts were running through my mind were so primal or foreign that I had given up on trying to understand them. I noticed later in the evening that the nearly 50-50 ratio crying to laughing had skewed, and I was spending more time giddily giggling and kicking my feet in anticipation. I recently heard the two of them talking about calling an ambulance and having me committed. It's a bit unfortunate that my apartment is on the 3rd floor, but I will survive the fall. In fact, if I leave now, I will have plenty of leeway to get to campus on foot and make it to class exactly on time. Story 6. I drew a god and now he won't leave me alone. I'm a university student halfway through my 2nd year studying art and history. The last few weeks have been brutal deadlines, pressure, stress. I'm behind in almost everything. My history essays are sprawling and aimless. My artwork looks lazy and uninspired. I've been putting in hours but getting nowhere, and I haven't been sleeping. Not because of nightmares. Just time. There's never enough of it. I know that sounds like a cliche. I'm a student, I don't sleep, but it's true. My schedule's a mess. I'll spend an hour trying to start painting, then spiral into panic, because I haven't done the reading for a lecture I forgot I even had. But this week, somehow, I managed to submit everything. Not well, not proudly, but done. For the first time in ages, I could finally breathe. No more all-nighters. No more caffeine-fueled essay sessions or crying over unblended acrylics at 3 a.m. So I slept and then I dreamt something wrong. It wasn't just unsettling. It meant something. It felt like a message. I was in a wheat field. It was overgrown and dry, flowing one with the wind. The clouds hung high above me, pale, loose, not threatening rain. The strangest thing was the sun. It was both rising and setting at once, dancing between golden and pink light like the sky couldn't make up its mind. There was nothing on the horizon, not a tree, not a distant barn or faraway city tower. Just wheat, endless painted waves of dry gold rolling over hills and hills of fertile land. And I was the first thing to ever touch it. The stalks brushed against my legs. They felt sharp at first, but over time they softened. I left a long trail behind me as I wandered, the pods hissing gently with every step. I walked for what felt like hours. The only sound was a shallow melody from a type of bug crickets, maybe, or something else that sings. Then I saw it, a blur, dark, human-shaped, far in the distance. I ran to it like a moth chasing fire. I don't know why. Something about it pulled me in, but then I tripped, and when I got back up, it was gone. I called out. Nothing answered, just a breeze passing through the place where he had stood. Still, I walked on. I crested the hill where the figure had been, and that's when the land shifted. The wheat was gone, all of it. In its place, a cold, barren field, dead grass and pale dirt. The only thing in sight now was a building, a castle. The young golden pink sky now grown red and dark blue. It rose in front of me like a monument to madness. Its towers leaned on one another. Its bridges led to nothing. The structure looked ancient, impossible. It wanted to be seen. It was now called to me. I turned back, just once, and saw that the trail I had left in the wheat was gone. The land had healed. The stalks stood tall again, like I'd never touched them, like I was never there. I went toward the castle. The doors were impossibly tall. They didn't budge at first. I pushed with all my strength, and eventually they gave just enough for me to slip through. The inside was dark and choking with dust. Fire lit the walls. Sunlight bled through stained glass the color of rich gold. The air tasted old. A hallway stretched out before me, lined with huge paintings, each one covered by a sheet. One was only half covered. I looked beneath the cloth. A knight, full silver armor. Every inch of it carved with strange, violent incantations that looked hammered in. Old, evil symbols I didn't recognize. I couldn't tell if the armor was meant to repel or welcome darkness. I didn't dare lift the cloth to see who or what wore it. At the end of the hall was another set of doors. These opened easier. Inside, a vast candlelit dining room. The ceiling stretched upward forever. A chandelier dangled over a table that could seat 80. 40 chairs on each side. Portraits hung from every wall, kings, queens, kingdoms, and the lay of the land. All of them staring down with petrified strokes of paint. And at the far end, before a massive stone fireplace, there was a throne. Slumped in it was a thing I had seen in the field. It wasn't human. It wasn't anything. Its flesh looked sewn together, stretched like old leather or poorly stitched textiles. Its jaw was long, almost animalistic, but just plain wrong. Too many teeth. No nose, just a hole. No eyes either, just skin-wrapped sockets that never ended, infinity deep, and misplaced horns twisted like deer antlers, black and overgrown. Its arm, long and bony, reached toward something in front of the old silver, crowned with sharp peaks almost like it was forged out of daggers. Its fingers were skeletal and ended in talons. The arm was wrapped in armor like the knight's, but cracked and darkened, similar but warped into a different time. The creature wore a thick, black cape. The collar was fur, mismatched prey and predator, hunter and hunted. It was lifeless, hunched, dead. I don't know why I walked closer. I don't know why I reached out and touched that crown. Beck accused, that's when its hand twitched. I fell backward, scrambling away. Its arm twitched again, sharper this time, jerking like a broken puppet. Then it leaned forward, using the table for support. A sharp crack echoed as its other arm landed with weight. Then, like something rising from a grave, it started to stand. Its joints popped, snapped. Every vertebra in its back cracked like breaking branches. 8 feet tall, maybe more with the horns. I backed away. It was still waking up, if you can call that thing waking. Its neck bent up far too slowly. Its jaw opened wide and yawning. From its throat came a gasping noise that became a growl, and then unmistakably the word, who. It sounded angry like a pharaoh raising to meet a tomb raider. Its eyeless head faced me now. Somehow it saw me. It took a step. Dust poured off its robes like falling ash. It was heavy and looked like a toddler taking its first steps, but its second step looked sturdier, and the third was muscle memory. I turned. The door wouldn't open. I slammed into it, again and again. The steps behind me were slow, but growing faster. The door burst open. I fell through and landed on my stomach. I don't remember crawling. I just remember being on my feet, running through the castle entrance. The creature didn't follow. Not fully. Back in the fields, I turned to look once I was far enough. He was standing there, looking at me like an aristocrat, watching and studying. For the first time, those eyeless sockets burned. A pair of yellow lights stared through the dusk. Then slowly, he put on the crown and closed the door. I collapsed in the wheat. I became part of the land again. And then I woke up. I gasped back to life and sat up in bed, covered in a cold sweat. It was still dark out. I'd woken up before even my earliest alarm. There was no way I was going back to sleep. Not with that thing still fresh in my mind. But it wasn't fear keeping me up. It was infatuation. I reached for one of my old sketch pads, thumbed through the blank pages, and started drawing. I didn't have a name for it yet, but later I started calling him the king. The kettle boiled, and I poured myself a coffee. 3 pages of sketches, the impossible castle, his face, or what I think was a face, the crown, the painting in the hallway. None of it was my best work, but something about it felt alive. There was potential. My first class that day was my art workshop. Nothing special, just standard uni stuff. But as I packed up, my professor came over to give me some pointers on the mess I'd been working on. My sketchbook was poking out of my bag. She saw it, casually asked if I'd drawn anything new. Proud of the chicken scratches I'd made that morning, I flipped to the king's horrid visage. She stared for a moment, then she gasped not in horror, but excitement. Within minutes, we were talking about scrapping my current piece and starting a new final project, built around what she called this surge of inspiration. That was it. The king's portrait was now my new final piece. And for the first time in weeks, maybe months, I felt good. Like I had something real to work toward. Like I'd earned that dream. But I didn't know then what I know now. That it wasn't just a dream. That he wasn't just some nightmare. That he was something older. Something hungrier. Something primordial. I'll have to continue this later. I've got a lecture in 10 minutes, and I really can't afford to fall further behind. Story 7. My name is James. I'm writing this because enough time has passed. My name is James. I'm writing this because enough time has passed, and I'm finally ready to talk about what happened that awful night on Halloween in 2012. A night carved into my memory like a twisted Jack O-lantern. For 13 years, it's haunted me. And honestly, I'm too tired to carry that weight anymore. Not that you'll believe what I'm about to tell you. Hell, there was a time I wouldn't have believed it myself. Most small towns have a local legend, a story meant to keep kids out of the woods after dark. My town's legend was the tale of a tattered man. According to the story, years ago a cruel man murdered a Haitian seamstress in a fit of rage. As she lay dying, she clutched a square cloth soaked in her own blood. She looked at it, pointed a trembling finger at him, and whispered her final words in defiance. "This is you." The next morning, the man was found dead in the woods by 2 police officers. His skin had been perfectly removed, cut into dozens of small, square patches. They say her curse gave those patches a life of their own. Now, a swarm of sentient, fleshy squares haunt the woods, each one with a tiny, hungry mouth. They hunt together, swarming their victims, biting and latching on until they completely envelop them. The victim dies in shock, consumed. becoming the next host. When you see the tattered man walking, you're not looking at a man at all. You're looking at the most recent victim, a hollowed-out body wearing a patchwork suit of living, breathing flesh. To see him is to know that someone's just died, and that you're next. Everyone in town knew the story. We all laughed about it at least once. Believing in the tattered man was seen as childish, kind of like believing in vampires and zombies or Santa Claus. I used to mock the people who claimed they'd seen him. That is, until that damned Halloween night in 2012. To properly explain what happened that night, you have to have known Leo. Leo and I were inseparable since middle school. Leo was the funniest kid I had ever met. He could own any conversation by turning it into a stand-up routine, like the time he gave a report while doing the chicken gag from Super Troopers, and GMO foods are destroying your health right meow. We were both fans of the X-Files. While I watched for entertainment, Leo was taking notes, developing stats for the creatures, and planning how hard it would be to find proof of their existence. This ritual, especially our X-Files marathon on Halloween, became a tradition. That is until the one year we didn't chill in his room ripping bongs and watching X-Files. And I've spent every day since regretting that decision. It was the summer of 2012 when Leo told me he saw the tattered man for the first time. I thought it was a joke. He'd always dismissed the tattered man, saying, "It's no Jersey Devil or Mothman." But this time he was serious. He called me frantically and invited me over. When I walked into his apartment, I could have sworn there had been an actual fire by how cloudy it was. The TV was off, which wasn't like Leo. I only found it because I saw the orange glow of 4 lit blunts in his mouth, like a Halloween-themed Audi logo. When I asked him why it was so smoky, it was far too smoky for a few blunts. He pulled the blunts out, smiled crookedly with eyes that looked demonically red, and said it was way more than 4 blunts. I laughed so hard at this that his house got me high. When Leo suddenly stopped laughing, I knew the joke was over. He looked at me in a deadpan way and told me that during his free period, he went exploring the woods we avoided as children, and he swore he saw the tattered man stumbling around. He said the smell coming off of it was so disgusting. He believes it's as old as the legend suggests. He asked me if I believed him, and I told him I did. But deep down, I thought he was full of shit. He then looked at me with complete sincerity. "Bro, I know all the stats. I can study this thing. I think this Halloween, instead of watching the X-Files again, you and I should try and hunt down the tattered man. And if we can't catch him, at least get solid evidence of his existence." What kind of skeptic turns down chasing a monster with their best friend? At the time, I didn't think it could be dangerous. In my mind, chasing shadows was a fun new twist on tradition. The next 4 months were a blur of classes and preparation. We didn't watch the X-Files anymore. We studied the tattered man, getting high while devising battle plans, armor, and weapons. We spent so much time on the hunt that we both fell behind in classes. I felt the need to help him. These were some of the best days of my life. A bittersweet memory considering what happened next. On Halloween, Leo wanted to start early. It was bright and sunny when we first got to the woods. We walked the perimeter, scouting and setting traps, stopping only for sandwiches and a joint. We watched over each other as we smoked, getting fake scared and having an absolute blast. It was getting dark the first time Leo told me he saw it, but I didn't see anything. I was sure he was trying to prank me. After the 3rd or 4th time, I looked up to his flashlight beaming at nothing but trees. I stopped looking up when he said he saw it. I was getting increasingly irritated, certain we were going to leave empty-handed. If I could have seen it once, just one of the times that he saw it, we wouldn't have even been in the woods anymore. When Leo told me he saw it again, I snapped. You know, it's pretty fucked up that we made this armor and all of these plans just to get out here, and the whole time it's just you trying to scare me. I regretted it as soon as I said it, and I know I'm going to regret it for the rest of my life, because it's the last thing I ever got to say to Leo. At least, I'm pretty sure it's the last thing he ever heard me say. I could tell by the look he gave me that he not only thought I was an asshole, but he knew I didn't believe him, that I had never believed him. He said, "I'll prove it to you, asshole. I think it's stuck in one of my traps. Follow me," and walked off. I followed, but only because I wanted to apologize. I was trailing behind him when I caught a whiff of the most disgusting smell I'd ever smelled, like rotting meat forgotten for a year. I yelled up to him, and as he turned toward me, I expected to see a face full of contempt, but what I saw in his eyes was sheer terror as he screamed at me to run. Then, I felt a pain rush through my arm. It felt like my whole arm had been hit by a hammer that was driving a truck, before a tiny mouth tore into my skin. I looked down and saw a squirming slab of rotten flesh ripping through my armor and boring into my arm. I ran screaming toward Leo, ripping the nasty square meat off my arm. As I passed him, I saw that he wasn't running. He was preparing his camera. I turned around just in time to see the camera flash, which illuminated the monstrous flying swarm of meat. That was the tattered man. Leo was right. He had finally gotten his proof, but it cost him everything. I watched, unable to move, as the tattered man tore into Leo. His screams will haunt me for the rest of my life. I watched as the swarm covered Leo entirely. To my horror, it walked straight by me, using his body. It was content with him, so it ignored me completely as I stood locked in fear like a deer in headlights. As I watched the tattered man unnaturally jerk past me, I noticed Leo's camera still swaying on his neck. I decided far too late that it was time to act. I noticed one of Leo's weapons on the ground, a super soaker full of acid, marked lethal. I sprayed the monster with it from behind, but other than a sizzling sound, it had no effect. I sprayed at it until the gun was dry, but nothing I did could save Leo. I felt so defeated. Leo and I came to the woods that day to hunt the tattered man, but the tattered man ended up hunting us both. I called the police, but as I was about to explain everything, I realized how it sounded. I told them he was lost. A search party was launched, and I even went with them, secretly hoping we would find the tattered man as a group and somehow overpower it. We never did. For a while after, life was unbearable. Hearing all the theories about what people think happened to Leo, they all hurt because no matter how crazy the theories were, I knew what happened and knew nobody would ever believe me. A few years after it happened, I realized that not every year, but once in a while, on Halloween night around 4 or 5 p.m., if I flick on the X-Files by a window, I might catch a short glimpse of the tattered man multiple times. I've seen him out there watching the X-Files with me. Leo was always a good friend, and I guess even in death, he still is. I'm writing this down because I think it will make the next part easier. Tonight is Halloween night, and I've had X-Files on for hours. I didn't feel his presence at all today, but I just caught a whiff of the worst smell I've ever smelled in my life. That rotting meat scent coming from right outside my window. I think I'm finally ready to step outside. Story 8. I got a job helping old people in a nursing home. Now I'm the one who needs help. Help! Hello there. Tall, dark, and handsome. The world's oldest woman said, batting her cataract-clouded eyes. What brings a hunk like you to our humble little nursing home? Well, I stammered. It was the first hour of my first day on the job, and I didn't quite know how to respond. Jamie, my supervisor, saved me the trouble. You really don't have to answer. Victoria asked of all the new male staff. She said, usher me toward her office at the end of the Clorox Senate Hall. Don't you, Victoria? Just a select few capable of satisfying my female needs, Victoria responded, stroking slowly, insinuatingly, the aluminum handles of her walker, shifting uneasily in my purple caregiver uniform. I gave her a quick once-over. Victoria wore a black, diaphanous nightgown, red lipstick that ventured well beyond the lips, rouged cheeks, and a saucy black beret angled provocatively over her milky right eye. Victoria lost, then regained her balance. She was wan, no more than 85 pounds, with thinning white hair, winded from the struggle to remain upright. She added, pausing frequently, I have a good eye for men, and you, sir, are the type that keeps me alive. So, before you go, I have an itty-bitty favor to ask. And what would that be? I asked, plastering on a smile, indulging her. A teeny tiny kiss, a peck on the cheek. She giggled, I turned to Jamie for approval. Personally, I saw no harm in giving Victoria what she wanted. I thoroughly enjoyed old people, the fascinating stories they told, the life lessons they taught me. It was one of the reasons I'd chosen to work in a nursing home. If brushing my lips against Victoria's rouged cheeks was elder abuse, the laws needed to be changed. But I didn't want to get fired on my first day. Apparently feeling the same as me, Jamie nodded her assent. Might do her some good. Always worked magic when your predecessor did the same thing. She turned to Victoria. But no more of your dirty tricks. Young lady, and you know what I mean. One peck. Dirty tricks? Who, me? Victoria asked, widening her eyes coquettishly, dislodging an enormous fake lash. She offered me her right cheek. I stepped forward, wondering if this was such a good idea after all. The scent of her rouge, her perfume, was overwhelming. Her round face, as it loomed ever closer, was like a powdered, quivering moon. My stomach revolted. The face of a young woman enthralled me. But Victoria's? With all due respect to mature females, Victoria was 127 years old, a human dinosaur whose bones might inspire lust in an archaeologist, not a young, single male. Nevertheless, I persisted, pursing my lips, leaning forward into the pecking zone. Serving the clients was my duty. Jamie had, during orientation, reminded me again and again I was only doing my job. Clamping my eyes shut, I dove in, only to have my lips smothered and a tongue thrust into my mouth, searching, probing, obscenely. Mucus like spittle clogged my throat. I gagged, but didn't dare part, for fear of offending Victoria, breaking her desperately lonely heart. She was failing badly. This might be her last kiss. With that in mind, I returned the favor, French kissing her deeply, opening my mouth in full surrender to her dying charms. Time ceased to exist. Victoria and I went on and on, clutching each other greedily, fusing our mouths. Oh my God, she was turning me on, and in full view of Jamie and assorted rubberneckers gathering in the hall, regaining my senses, I did what any other red-blooded young man in my position would do. I vomited in my mouth. Victoria tongued the bile, swallowing it, drinking me in, gasping. I pushed us apart. Victoria smiled triumphantly. Her mouth was a gaping black hole. My thrusting tongue had dislodged her false teeth. She cupped the dripping plate high in her right hand. I'm sorry. I apologized to Jamie. Guess I should turn to my uniform, hey? No harm done, as far I can see, Jamie replied. Surprisingly, I'd already started unbuttoning my company-provided purple smock. Victoria's happy. You seem pretty happy, too. Make that very happy. Get a room, an onlooker joked. Jamie shooed him away. Seriously, she said to me, what you just showed me was an admirable commitment to the patient population, a strong work ethic. You'll do anything for a client. I like that. She turned to Victoria. Now put your teeth back in and go to your room. The evening meal will be served in an hour. Scurry. Victoria shuffled off silently, but not before giving me a wink and a sly grin. I stifled my own surprising smile. My heart skipped a beat when she closed her door. I felt like smashing it down and covering her with hungry kisses. What the F asterisk, 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 K was going on with me? First night jitters? Get a grip? Dude, I buttoned and smoothed my smock. Jamie appeared unfazed. But then, she was a nursing home veteran. She'd seen and heard all manner of weird things. Pulling me with her, Jamie skittered into her office and closed the door. Sorry about back there, she said, rolling her eyes. Don't want to turn you off before your first shift at Eternity Nursing Home and hospice care even begins. 20 feet away, Victoria had cracked open her door. She was watching us, or more specifically me, her face an ancient mask of lust. Her teeth were back in, though a tad loose. Bile rose in my throat. I sensed that, if she kept staring, I'd vomit again. This time in full view, pouring onto Jamie's desk, her lap, me, the 20-year-old super fit guy with an iron stomach. Help me close the blind, would you? Jamie asked, dropping them with a clatter over her glass door. Victoria can't hear well. but there are times I feel she's reading lips. With the blinds down, Jamie's office fell into a disorienting twilight. Nevertheless, with Victoria out of sight, my stomach settled down, and, thank goodness, my libido returned to baseline, even with the cataracts. Believe or not, those come and go. The ophthalmologist can't explain it, other than to say that Victoria's a one-off, unique. Most of her other medical people are scratching their heads. 2, she'll get worse for a while, seemingly at death's door, and then her health will improve dramatically just like that. Jamie clapped her hands sharply. I jumped. Jamie, I was increasingly aware, was a little off, too. She continued. One doctor proclaimed that when Victoria was in an up phase, she was like a healthy 45-year-old in the body of a 127-year-old. That was just before the last male caregiver quit or disappeared or whatever, opening up the position you now occupy. 127? For real, best as we can tell. She was born prematurely in a remote Romanian village. Appallingly, Victoria's mother was alone at the time, peeling the household's few remaining turnips for that night's watery soup. Her husband and all healthy men of working age had apparently run off, humiliated that the entire root vegetable crop had failed. Cabbage, radishes, rutabagas, the whole lot. To them, that was an insult to their masculinity, their role as providers, which left only women, children, and a few elderly, near-worthless men. What records there were of Victoria's birth disappeared when the village was burned to ground. Some claim it was arson committed by the humiliated men. At any rate, it was at that point that all women and children fled. 2 years after migrating to Bucharest, Victoria's mother obtained a signed statement from a former village matriarch verifying that Victoria had been born in 1898. And that's what she brought along when she and her daughter traveled by merchant ship to the United States. Jamie shrugged. It became Victoria's de facto birth certificate that she carried with her everywhere. 10 years ago, when her health started failing and she moved in with us, our former communications director used it to dub her the oldest woman in the world. The media picked up on it, and the title stuck. She adopted a mischievous grin. And get this, no one outside these walls know. But I can tell you now that you're part of the team, I'm distantly related to Victoria. How fascinating. I lied, immersed in the memory of Victoria's brain-melting kiss. Seeming to sense my disinterest, Jamie replied, Yeah, we trace our lineage back to the same Romanian village or something. She slid behind her gray metal desk. Well, enough of Lady V for now. Let me fill you in on your duties. I leaned back on my wobbly steel chair and listened. I've been hired as a new overnight caregiver, a solo position that would involve dispensing medications, rarely, changing bedpans, and most of all, sweeping and mopping. In other words, glorified janitorial work. Having walked through facility after an initial orientation, I figured I could get everything done in under 2 hours, after which I'd have 6 hours to do homework, social sciences undergrad, or play online video games. I was a loner and didn't have friends. There were only 15 residents, not including those in the hospice wing, which was locked and off limits to me and all nursing home staff. A CCTV camera hovered over the chained double doors in continuous scanning mode, which seemed a tad excessive, given that the nursing home residents knew that all who entered soon died. A short while later, Jamie was gone. The facility's lights had been dimmed. I was the only employee left. Even the cook had clocked out, leaving a food service cart for me to wheel around to the residents' rooms. After serving them dinner, I'd collect their plates and they'd all go to sleep. Their TVs still blaring, of course. I gave the food cart a shove. Shit, my knee went out. Man, it hurt. Maybe I twisted it playing pickup b-ball the night before. One of the rare times I got out and mixed, limping around, swearing. I spied a resident's forgotten cane. Hobbling over, I snatched it up. Pretty stylish, I thought, except for prong base. I gave it a test run to the staff break room, the cane taking just enough weight off my throbbing knee. Breathing easier, I eyed myself in a mirror. The cane was looking pretty natty, but the harsh lights made it seem like I was developing premature crow's feet. I turned the lights down. The crow's feet disappeared, but food service was running late. The residents would complain to Jamie, and it would be by job. I gathered up the food cart, bent on doing the right thing, and then, gripped by irresistible yearning, I raced past one room, and then another, the cart rattling over the tiles. I needed to feed Victoria, apologize, and more than anything, kiss her again. That feisty lass had stripped me off all reason, made me heedless like never before. So much so that I snagged the stainless steel cart with my orthopedic cane. It teetered, then fell, instant oatmeal, orange sherbet, and Salisbury steak, spilling on the floor. Who cared? I turned one last corner, limping toward Victoria, and thank God, there she was, leaning languidly against her door in a snug cashmere sweater tied at her slim waist, looking 20 years younger, which made her 109 and me sick again. Rushing forward, I vomited into her yearning mouth, overjoyed that something magnificent had started that could not be stopped. We locked lips for 10 heavenly minutes, her nimble tongue exploring my every molar and gum. Her thick saliva was like nectar to me. I swallowed it greedily, aching for more and more. A cacophony of heavy explosions filled the air. "What's that?" Victoria, breaking away, exclaimed. Caught in flagrante delicto, I panicked, fantasizing that a SWAT team, the FBI, was charging down the hall, flinging shock grenades, eager to arrest me for the allegedly deplorable crime of necking with a woman 107 years my senior. More deafening explosions than a swell of music, and I recognized the sounds as the opening scenes of the Vietnam War movie, Apocalypse Now, blasting from the unattended TV in the snoring resident's room. "Better finish your dinner rounds before the natives get restless," Victoria advised. She was suddenly cold, despite our recently completed mouth-to-mouth exchange of bodily fluids. "Whatever milady desires," I said, bowing in an exaggeratedly courtly manner, kissing her spotted hand. Unsmiling, she shook me off and shut her door with unexpected force. I returned to the staff room, my mind a riot of passion and guilt. Grabbing a mop and pail, I doubled back to the hall, where I picked the Salisbury steaks off the floor, mopped them, and then covered the lot with a fresh can of cold turkey gravy. To hell with the other residents. I only cared, deeply cared, about one sultry filly who was driving me clear out of my mind. Under Victoria's sultry spell, I found it hard to calm down. My good knee shook, my bad knee was still tender and sore. Back in the staff room, I locked and bolted the door. As an extra measure, I blocked it with a pair of filing cabinets. I needed to think. I wasn't much of a ladies' man. I'd made out with 5 girls and struck gold with one. Though I'd been so drunk, I didn't know it until she'd showed me the evidence on her phone. Yet my shyness had melted away the moment I first saw lovely Victoria. From that moment on, I craved her kiss. Nothing, not even 10 SWAT teams could keep from the exquisite pleasure of her cracked, dry lips. Contemplating Victoria, my hands shook. To settle my nerves, I watched a video of British politician Theresa May, who had a voice and manner that, without fail, lulled me to sleep. I awoke with a start, pulling a muscle in my lower back. I'd napped for minutes, but it seemed like years. Grabbing my cane, I shuffled over the staff medicine cabinet. On top of everything, my stomach was cramping from constipation. I drank a heaping glass of Metamucil, with no results. I glanced in the mirror. Something was dead wrong. My curly black hair was speckled with gray, and the crow's feet had returned more numerous and deeper than before. I looked like an anal cavity that had stopped functioning. I took a swing at the glaring overhead lights. My shoulder went out. Damn. More F asterisk 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 G pain. BRNNGG. An emergency bell rang. I checked the patient communications panel. The distress call was coming from Victoria's room. Tearing the file cabinets away from the staff door, my injured back muscle spasmed, and I collapsed on the floor. Gritting my teeth, I tried and failed to rise. I'd fallen down and couldn't get up in a retirement home. Laughing ruefully, I crawled outside to a recharging electric mobility scooter, pulled out the plug, and dragged myself into the driver's seat. I floored the vehicle, shouting at a resident who'd had the temerity to get in my way. Who gave a damn about her petty concerns? Victoria came to her door, wearing a lacy black girdle, red high heels, and sequin halter top. She puffed a Gauloise cigarette in an ebony holder. Her body was shockingly trim and fit. "What are you here for?" she asked, her voice still icy cold. She blew smoke in my face. "You rang." "Oh, that's right. Silly me," she said, shaking her head. "So, what is it you want to say to me?" I asked, desperate for encouraging words, like, "Kiss me, you fool." "We're done," she replied, admiring her astonishing physique. "WY, after all we've been through?" I demand an explanation. "I don't date old men. I'm 20F asterisk 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 G years old." Could have fooled me. You can't walk under your own power. Your hair has gone completely gray. Your hands are trembling with early stage Parkinson's disease. And, for God's sake, buy some Depends. I looked down. Indeed, my crotch was soaking wet. "It's you who's done this to me. I was perfectly fine until I met you." "Oh, such anger you have. And here I thought you adored me." "I do. I mean, I need you. I want you. I exist for your kiss. Please, please, just one more and I'll never ask again." Victoria smiling knowingly. "You're just like all the others. And there have been so many." She shook her head. "I thought your lips were mine alone. One man has never been enough for me. You come and go. One night, and frankly, I'm done with you. No, I'm not like those other men. I'm decent. I'm kind. I'm yours for eternity. You poor, deluded soul. You have so much to learn, and so little time." Then a last kiss. "I beg of you." I cried, clasping my hands. I tried, but couldn't get up, indulging me. Victoria bent down and plunged her tongue deep into my mouth, deeper than ever before. It was a sympathy kiss, I knew, but the effect on me was the same. I shuddered with excitement. We exchanged vile bodily fluids one last sweet time. Crestfallen, I turned around the mobility cart and whirred off down the hall. Halfway down the hall, I looked back. Victoria, my Victoria, was already back in her room. My chest tightened unexpectedly. Sharp pain shot down my upper left arm. Struggling with the steering wheel, I careened to the partially open staff room door, coming to a sudden stop against the far wall. Thrown to the floor, it took every ounce of my waning strength of me to boot up the portable heart defibrillator, attach the pads, and shock myself out of a massive heart attack. My entire body shuddered. I lost consciousness. I awoke with Jamie looming above me, her face a mask of benevolent concern. I was on a gurney, in a room lined with row upon row of bedridden elderly men. They moaned and called out, "Kiss me. More, I want more. Abandon the others, Victoria. Make me the only one." Your arrival has agitated them. But don't worry. Jamie admonished me. They'll quiet down after the morning sedation. She shifted a huge load of paperwork from one arm to the next, numerous pages fluttering to the floor. She wore a black babushka and a flowing peasant dress. "Where are the doctors? The nurses?" I asked, my words muffled by an oxygen mask. "We have sufficient staff," Jamie observed. I turned to see numerous women, also in babushkas and peasant dresses, wiping patient brows, administering morning meds. They exuded professional cheer, laughing and joking with the dilapidated men. And it may make you feel better to know that you're not hospitalized. No, you're still in eternity care, the hospice wing, in qualified hands, under specialized care. Jamie was on her hands and knees, scooping up pages. "Is that my chart? Hand it to me right now." Jamie chuckled. "No, these are resumes," she said, waving one. "We're hiring again, overnight mail staff. But that's my job. I need the money." Speaking through the oxygen mask was like whispering help from the bottom of a well. "Please, you're in no shape to continue. Nor is he." "Or he," she said, indicating two nearby patients. "And who the fuck are they?" "Your predecessors. In work and French kissing." Sighing, she pulled up a plastic chair. She cradled her hands, exhaled. "You see, Victoria is a special needs patient. And those special needs are, man, about one every 6 weeks. She waxes after receiving your kisses. I once saw her run a 6-minute mile in the morning after a single nightstand, and she had just turned, I believe, 115. She ages quickly after that, until she reaches the broken down state in which you first encountered her. Bullshit. Not possible. Not without single, lonely men like you. And your bile. I tore off the oxygen mask. Let me the F asterisk asterisk K. Out of here, you F asterisk 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 G nutbag. Code white. Aggressive hospice care patient. Jamie called out, and 2 attendants came running. One of them restrained my arms. The other returned to my face the oxygen mask. Sweat and saliva dripping down. My breathing had become labored, so I was actually thankful. You proved my point, sir, Jamie continued. In the process of locking lips, Victoria partakes of the male essence and returns it to you in neutered form of a thick paste. So what you're saying is that the essence of man is vomit? Please. More precisely, bile. Literally and figuratively. A bout of laughing caused me a flatline. The attendants revived me with amyl nitrate, after which Jamie returned. Jamie remained standing this time. She looked at her watch. Listen, I've had to post this help wanted ad. Your position is open and Victoria will begin her precipitous decline again soon. I'm going to report you to the health authority. This roused the patient next to me, a pathetic creature with a bulbous stomach and toothpick arms. Me and you both, he said, before falling again into a comatose state. I think you're better off here, she said. Turning to the other patients, raising her voice, she proclaimed, you're all better off here, receiving the care only we can provide. Her stern voice carried an implied threat. So you're ready to throw away your reputation for a single 127-year-old crazy woman? That's where you're wrong, sir. Victoria isn't 127. She's 238. Sure, Victoria's my great-grandmother 13 times over. I told you in my office that we were related. In fact, every female in here is related to her somehow, patients and staffers alike. It's our home away from home. Victoria has been protecting the women of our village from the depredations of our village males for centuries. She keeps us safe, aging and regenerating, by surrendering her body to manly bile, which of course all women do. So, what makes Victoria different? That's a village secret for now. But one day, all women will adopt her method. That's why our clan brought her to the United States, the place that spreads freedom around the world. Keeping Victoria alive keeps hope of our own freedom alive. With that, Jamie left. As of this writing, she has not come back, allowing me, with my pain, arthritic hands to scribble my tale, in tiny cursive on this odorous pair of pens, that I hope some dumpster diver will retrieve from the facility's trash and bring to your attention. If you are reading this, he succeeded. Until I hear from you, I will continue watching game shows on the ceiling TV along with the rest of the hospice crowd. At piercing volume, of course. And unless the cavalry comes, that may be for a long while. You see, before Jamie left, she told me that while I've aged prematurely, I will live out my normal lifespan, which means I'm looking at a good 80 years of Parkinson's, heart seizures, and wheel of fortune, a fate worse than death. But I'd suffer through 80 more dismal years for another splendiferous night of tonsil hockey with the oldest and sexiest woman on earth. Story 9. Only once have I seen the door. Hey, everyone. My name's Jack. I've decided to write all this here. Maybe it'll help me make sense of it all and keep a solid track on my chronology of things. Maybe someone out there has felt something similar. I doubt it. But hey, the internet can be a strange place. First, some background. I'm not a crazy person. At least, I'd like to hope I'm not. I'm a pretty normal guy. I'm going to college. I have a part-time job at a fast food place. I've got ex-girlfriends. I drive a Ford Focus. Blah, blah, blah. But my whole life, I've had these moments. They're hard to describe. So I'll pose you this analogy to give you the right foundation. I have a lot of these vague glimpses of memories from when I was a very young child, of my own parents socializing, having a drink with friends, hosting events, whatever, where I'd wander downstairs to get a snack or something. And I'd feel a little bit caught off guard for a moment by the sight of strangers in my house that my parents seemed to be getting on fine with. My parents would try to introduce me to their friend or cousin that I didn't recognize, but I'd forget about whoever they were shortly after. I feel like a lot of people have early childhood memories like that, because when we were very young children, our parents were naturally younger too, and were spending more time keeping up with friends and whatnot. Sometimes I'll get a glimpse of something like a wine glass or a lit candle on a table and feel myself floating away, back into vague flashes, and feelings of a dinner party my parents had one night with the in-laws or something like that. And that's what I'm getting at. Random feelings of recognition in your surroundings that give you hard to pin down senses of familiarity, leading you back to half-formed memories. But the way I experience it is a bit different. It's not deja vu. It's more like a stutter, a momentary glitch in my own perception. I like to call it static. It usually happens when I'm run down, sleep deprived, or after smoking too much weed too quick. Like, for example, I'll be lying in bed hungover, listening to the low hum of my desk fan, and for a split second, the hum will resolve. It'll sound like a distant crowd of people cheering excitedly about something, or a woman singing a song in a different language. The weirdest part, then, is the feeling that follows. The absolute bone-deep realization that I've been listening to those noises for the last 5 minutes. I just hadn't realized it yet. It's like a retroactive certainty. My conscious mind is always the last to know. I've felt this static with sights, too, like a particular shade of peeling yellow paint on a bus stop that I gazed at for a few minutes before suddenly feeling sure I'd seen on the wall of a hospital room, somewhere I'd been in once when I was a kid. The feeling is never, hey, that looks familiar. It's there is again. It's been here the whole time. I've always written it off. A trick of a tired brain. My synapses misfiring. It's always been so easy to disregard because it was so rare. That was before everything that happened. How it starts is I'd already been feeling hungover, and out of it from a house party I'd been at the previous day. It was 2 p.m. by the time I was up from the couch. I started my day, just like Anthony and the others waking up at his flat, with a breakfast of leftover Chinese poorly reheated in the microwave, a glass of Dr. Pepper from a bottle we'd been using last night for mixers, and a few bong rips. So, by the time we'd gotten ourselves sufficiently baked, it was 4 p.m. and I was walking to the bus stop with our group. Anthony's flat is in an estate about a 20-minute walk down some barren roads and suburbs away from the town where me and him grew up. We were walking with some of the other guys and gals from the party with the intention of getting a bus back over to where our community college is, an hour or so away, where most of us were living in student accommodation. But somewhere along the way, in the scorching heat of the day in our hazy state, we took a wrong turn. Even Anthony wasn't sure exactly where we were. We had a loose idea, since we were still near the huge woods of the state park that enclose around much of the area between Anthony's estate and our hometown. As we kept walking and chatting aimlessly, we eventually stumbled upon a strange pub, a sort of half bar, half arcade that was set up across from an empty, dusty yard or lot. There were only a few rundown bungalows nearby. We stared at the odd pub. I felt sure it was just a lame dive bar with a few arcade machines shoved in the corners to get 80s nostalgic types all horny and drain them with shitty bar prices. But we were so bored and stoned that we saw the possibility of arcade games and freshly poured beers and thought, sure, why not? While everyone spent the following hours throwing back drinks in our elegantly disheveled state in that crummy place, a strange sense of premonition in my mind, and Anthony's too, I think, seemed to have sprouted. A strange feeling of growing dread, a sense of anticipation for some huge revelation. That feeling kept growing, something completely unknown and yet undeniable, as time passed into evening and then nightfall, as I continued drinking, trying to make conversation with people, chatting with girls I liked the look of, normal bar stuff. I remember there was this fat, nasty spider in one of the corners of the ceiling. It hadn't made a web. It was just slowly skulking about in circles. I couldn't take my eyes off it. Now, my buddy Anthony is what you'd call an experienced tripper. He believes in expanding the mind, so to speak. I was always the cautious one. Anthony tapped on my shoulder late into the night and took me outside, where he showed me the tabs of acid he'd been talking about. I remember feeling that the moment was important. I mean that moment. Standing outside that strange pub at night, staring across the road at that dusty yard, and behind it, the woods. I knew that I would remember that moment for the rest of my life. Even though nothing that special was really even going on, I knew I'd remember Anthony's Marietta t-shirt. I'd remember the pile of tires scattered in the yard. I'd remember the rusty storm drain a few feet from where we stood at the pub's entrance. We decided my first acid trip should be somewhere peaceful in nature, so we picked one of the winding country roads around into the state park woods and started walking. Then we partook. The come-up was fine, a little giddiness. The trees looking a bit more vibrant. Then I hit the peak. The world started to breathe. The asphalt of the road pulsed like a vein. Anthony was walking beside me, talking about the life cycle of moss or something. His voice a steady, grounding presence. But then a second voice started up. It was also Anthony's voice, but it wasn't coming from beside me. It was inside my head, clear as day, as though he were sitting in an empty room right behind my eyes. He was commenting on my thoughts, narrating my panic. He's thinking about the fan now. The internal Anthony voice said as I looked in utter disorientation at the real Anthony, calm and conversational. He's wondering if it's all connected. I stared at the real Anthony. His mouth was moving, talking about how the universe is all connected. And that means busting a nut and getting a girl pregnant is basically the same as planting a tree sapling. The voice of Anthony in my head, however, was speaking directly to me. "Dude, you okay?" the real Anthony asked. "You're looking a little pale." That's when I saw a third man off in the distance, about 50 feet ahead. Standing off the path under the canopy of an ancient oak tree was a man. He was tall, gaunt, looked to be in his 40s, wearing a brown suit that looked decades out of date. He was just standing there, staring at the bark of the tree, running his fingers over it like he was reading Braille. There was something about his facial features, the exact movements of his hands. At first, it was just a vague sense of familiarity, and then I felt a spark within me. I felt those same feelings of static I've described throughout my life. Something about a kid I'd known briefly in the early days of my childhood. His name was Douglas, I'm pretty sure. A third cousin, I think, or maybe a family friend's son. Or was he some imaginary friend I had? No, he was definitely real, and he was in the family, but he wasn't a close relative. I saw him maybe twice in my life. My one solid memory of him is from a family gathering when I was 6. All the other kids were playing tag. But I found Douglas, who was a few years older than me, sitting alone by the creek. He was meticulously stacking these smooth, gray stones into a perfect, freestanding archway of sorts, like a little depiction of a skyscraper jutting up from the ground. It was impossibly delicate. When he saw me watching, he didn't smile. I thought it was cool and impressive. I remember, so I asked him how he'd made it. He just looked at me with these ancient, tired eyes and said, "It's a door, but you mustn't open it." Then he kicked it over and walked away. The man standing underneath that tree was a grown-up version of Douglas. There was no doubt in my mind. I don't know how I knew. I just knew it. "Anthony," I slurred, my tongue feeling thick. "Do you see that guy under the tree?" Anthony squinted. "What guy, man?" "There's no one there." "Hey, dude, constellations. They're weird. It's like they're people in the sky, or in the things between." I didn't understand what Anthony meant. It felt all wrong. I saw movement in the distance. The man Douglas turned his head slowly and looked directly at me. His face was a mask of sorrow, so deep it felt geological, like he wasn't really a brain behind it all, just pure misery. This is impossible. I thought, my mind reeling. I realized how little this made sense. Even if I was tripping, this couldn't be Douglas. Douglas had only been a few years older than me as a kid, so this 40-ish looking guy obviously can't be him. And something else. My mom had told me about it years later. This memory took even longer to dredge up. It was the thought of constellations that brought it back to me. I don't even know where the connection is in that. Douglas had had some mental break. At some point, my mom told me once years ago, he's been in an institution since he was a teenager. He couldn't even NE here right now, on top of him not being the right age. So why was my brain constructing all of this? As I continued locking eyes with the stranger, as Anthony stared off into space beside me, the internal Anthony voice answered that last question the second it had occurred to me. He's the devil. The real Anthony was now looking across at me, concerned, asking if I needed to sit down. But in that moment, I knew two things for sure. The voice in my head was absolutely not my friend, and that man under the tree, whether he was Douglas or the devil or both or neither, was certainly real in a way that Anthony, the road, and the trees suddenly didn't feel like they were. The filter wasn't just down, it had been torn off somehow, and I felt I could finally see the static that was there all along, even if I didn't understand what that really meant. Anthony decided to call things off then, and we went and got a motel to wait out the rest of the trip. Part of me wanted to forget about everything, to pretend it just never happened, or that, like Anthony said, I'd just gotten unlucky and had an awful first trip. But the other part, the part that's been listening to the hum of the static my whole life, knew that wasn't an option. The door was open, and I couldn't just close my eyes on what was inside. Coming down from the trip was like being thrown back into a world made of cardboard after seeing the real scaffolding and foundations underneath. Everything felt thin and fake. Anthony drove me home. Freaked out, he was saying, "Dude, you were just having a bad trip, even though it sucks that it was your first time it happens." But he wouldn't look me in the eye. The problem is, it didn't stop when the acid wore off. The filter was gone. Permanently. Now, the static was everywhere. The first time it happened, I was making some coffee for myself. I was listening to the background noise of the drip, drip, drip of the coffee machine while going to the fridge for milk. I realized the sound had, somewhere in the background, suddenly sounded unmistakably like the unintelligible voice of someone from long ago in my past. Some girl called Molly from my elementary school that I hadn't really been friends with and could barely even remember at first. I could suddenly make out what her voice was saying as it coalesced into three clear and whispered words before it vanished from my mind right as I'd realized it. And even today I can't remember the tone of voice or punctuation as she spoke them, just the words themselves. "Ask your grandpa." I stood there frozen, the carton of milk feeling somehow warm in my hand. This could have been nothing. It could have been exactly like before, just a random intense recognition, just like the moment of static I'd gotten in the past. "Ask your grandpa" is a perfectly normal phrase in and of itself, after all. And it's the kind of thing I might have a vague, mostly forgotten memory of someone almost completely irrelevant to my life saying once. And yet I felt sure that it wasn't just a memory. I felt sure it meant something, that it was an instruction. I felt I had no real choice to make. So I went to visit my grandfather. Me and Grandpa Francis have a good relationship. He's 70, but his mind is still mostly sharp, no signs of decline. He just gets a little wistful, sometimes is all. I meet up with him at his house every few months to have a glass of something and a chat. He lives in a quiet, detached house about an hour away that smells of old books and liniment. I gave him a call and said I was passing through his neck of the woods and was wondering if he wanted to catch up for a bit. He was more than welcome to it. When I arrived, he ushered me inside as always with firm handshake. I didn't know how to bring it all up. I just tried to stay engaged with Grandpa's initial small talk and questions as he poured us each a glass of Captain Morgan's Spice Gold, before trying to subtly pivot and steer the conversation over. I did the only thing I could think of and asked him casually enough if he had any interesting or weird stories from when he was younger. Grandpa Francis is full of stories, and swapping them is something we'd often do. He got a suddenly distant look in his eyes. "Well," he said, and I could almost hear it in his relatively steady voice. Underneath the lazy composure, the sound of the cogs in his head gradually kicking into action, there was my old friend Petey. This was back around when we were no older than you are now. Just two guys with everywhere to be and nowhere to go. The two of us working in the old auto shop all day long. Boy, you remember how it was, amount of times you've seen that dump over the years. but I was always happy with how things were. Quiet, no fuss. That's the life I wanted. But Petey thought there had to be more to the world. More to see, more to feel, more to experience. Always more with that fella. God, Jack, you remember all the stories I've told about the road trips and the hiking and the folks we'd meet at bars. Wouldn't have happened without Petey. He rattled my nerves to no end, but I would have lived a less full youth without him, no doubt. I leaned in. Grandpa had talked about his old friend Petey before. I felt this was going somewhere, but I played it cool. Grandpa took a sip and continued. Petey would go exploring when he was free. Exploring the roads, the abandoned houses, everywhere, especially the woods, the big state park, not far from where that friend of yours lives. Actually, at that, I had to suppress a chill. Petey was stupid. You hear me? Stupid kid. Always poking his nose where it didn't belong, hoping he'd find something new. And eventually, he found something all right, something strange. He took me into the woods one summer day, wanting to show me. It was a door, Grandpa said after a pause. Just a door made of old, dark wood, standing all by itself in a clearing. No house, just this door. It was in good nick, fresh paint job on there, and the bottom of the door frame was nailed securely into the topsoil of the ground. So it stood perfectly upright, just like a normal door. Petey, he was always the brave one. He walked right up to it. Grandpa paused again, taking a longer sip. The house was silent, except for the ticking of the clock. I realized I had stopped breathing. What does that make Petey? Grandpa asked. Stupid. I answered, trying to force a jokey voice. He gets closer and closer to the doorframe, and I'm thinking it's a bad idea. I'm thinking he's putting himself in danger. But, why would I even have thought that? It's just a door. But it felt all kind of wrong. Petey's almost able to reach out and touch the door when it opens up. A man stepped out. I suppose he was always standing in that clearing in the woods behind the door. You wouldn't call it stepping out of the door so much as walking through it. No way to know which way's in and which way's out, right? He was dressed in normal enough clothes, but there was something wrong with his eyes. Petey told me later it was like looking into a well that had no bottom. He looked at us, and he had this expression of anguish on his face, so profound it was almost alien. And then his voice, it sounded exactly like the voice of someone I could remember, but I don't know who. There was something about it that had been changed, something made poisonous. The whole clearing smelled like an electrical fire. It's worse inside, he said. Petey fell back and grasped my arm and whispered to me like he just knew it. He's all bad. And he was. We ran all the way home and never spoke of it again. Grandpa finished. I knew that day that the Lord works in strange ways, but I wonder sometimes, does the devil work in stranger? He made the sign of the cross in an unfocused way as he gazed out the window. We both drained our glasses. I tried to keep myself in check, while Grandpa and I carried on having a generally fine chat for the next 10 minutes or so. I could tell it was time to leave. Grandpa was more zoned out now than before. We said our goodbyes. I knew why it was. He was brooding. I'd heard about Petey in a good few of Grandpa's old stories from back in his day. If I was remembering correctly, Petey Jackson had died less than a year after that story Grandpa just told me, when he was around 20, 1976. The exact details of his death are the only part that Grandpa himself had never actually told me. He'd never needed to. I'd heard it all before, because Petey's death is still a mystery. I couldn't help but think about it as I drove home. Petey vanished one day, after a day's work at the auto shop. Him and Grandpa parted ways as always, but Petey's family never saw him come home. Only a few hours later, Petey was found naked and dead in a ditch by some teenagers who were out camping a whole state away. Petey didn't even have a car of his own. Nobody had any idea how he could have gotten there on his own. I only knew about this part from Grandpa Francis, but a few weeks after that, a bartender in our hometown opened up for the day and set about to work one morning as usual before he noticed. In the dusty, barren yard across the road, there was a small, slightly damaged and pitiful-looking fridge standing by itself. He'd no idea who dumped it, but wanted to get rid of it, since he thought it was an eyesore. He dropped it on his first attempt, and the door snapped open, spilling its contents. Stuffed inside that fridge had been some of Petey's clothes, neatly folded and pristine. There were that clothes that didn't belong to him at all in there too. A deck of Magic the Gathering cards, Petey's baseball bat, and the shed skin of some kind of tarantula. Grandpa told me the bartender just left the fridge in the yard after that. Didn't want to go anywhere near it. Grandpa called the police himself when he heard about the clothes and baseball bat, but nothing ever came of it. Petey's death was never solved, and they never found out why his things turned up after the fact in that manner. When I got home, the investigation began. I'm in the process of working through my sociology thesis for my sophomore year of college. I'm used to research. I started digging into local records, old newspaper archives. I wasn't looking for shit about the devil or strange doors in the woods. I was looking for patterns. And believe me, I found them. It took many, many hours of digging, but eventually I stumbled upon them. The first was an article from 2016 about a boy a few counties away from my area named Douglas Pickman, who, not long after his 16th birthday, was committed to a mental institution after being found wandering in that same state park. I'd heard bits and pieces of the story before, though I was shaky on the details. Try and pull at threads I could mostly remember from overheard conversations as a child. Douglas had seemed disoriented and strange for weeks beforehand. According to his parents, they said he'd been refusing to eat anything that had color. It was rice, bread, mashed potato, and milk every breakfast, lunch, and dinner. He'd sneak out constantly at night, but there were no signs that he was meeting girls, partying, doing drugs, anything. His grades remained fine, near perfect, actually. He'd sneak outside and just stand outside his first floor bedroom window, staring out into the night. Why even bother going outside? By day, where he thought nobody was looking. They'd sometimes see him out on the road, leading out from the house, stooping over, staring down into a particular storm drain. They'd heard once from a postman that he'd been whispering things down into the drain. One thing the postman could remember hearing was, "I remember I was killing you, but it's all different inside." Douglas' friends at school said he'd kept trying to give away his things to them, saying he'd just be throwing them away otherwise. Things they knew he was proud of, like his signed band t-shirts and Magic the Gathering cards. Once, his dad had heard him skulking about at night and went to investigate. He couldn't find him in his bedroom, or anywhere in the house for that matter, staring out the window into the night, a terribly stormy one. Lightning flashed for a few seconds in the blue, white-hot light, illuminating momentarily the fields across from their house. He saw Douglas, 100 feet away, running around carefree, going in and out from behind the many hay bales scattered about. When the man got out to his son, he found him lying unconscious on the golden soil. He was wearing different clothes. Somehow, both his parents said they'd never bought or seen them before. They were old school, like 70s high school style. There was a dead cat on the ground next to him. One day, he snuck out and never came back. There was a search, and a day later the police found him in those woods of the state park, having climbed up a tree and refusing to come down, claiming he'd found where it sounds right. He was violently thrashing a long, rusty nail at any of the officers who tried to pull him down. He was only collected after he'd started bashing his forehead against a thick, jutting stump in the tree branch and dented his skull, falling down onto the ground about 10 feet below. He was apparently very lucky to survive and had done permanent damage to his skull. I suddenly remembered something else as I read. Something my mother had mentioned to me years ago when she told me about all of this. The memory was still foggy, but I remember her telling me something Officer Dell had said to her once. He's married to a friend of my mom's, Caroline Dell, so they know each other well enough, according to him, as Douglas fell from the tree, and after he landed before passing out from the shock and blunt force trauma, he kept screeching incoherently. Screeches like a fax machine, Dell had said. I've got no idea what that could mean, but it didn't sound good. And one thing, intelligible in the screeching, over and over, "Where's the boy?" Dell said he seemed to be staring right at him, and his eyes were like every pair of eyes he'd ever looked into, but different. And as he stared down at the boy being cuffed, he was startled when the air suddenly reeked of something like an electrical fire. All the other officers denied that detail when he mentioned it afterwards. A few months later, Caroline miscarried their child. As the doctors broke that information to them, Dell said he remembered that exact smell again, seeping into every crack of the maternity ward. He's never smelled it again, apparently. They never did end up trying again for a child. I'd no idea what to make of all this. It was all just strange things I could half remember hearing about before, suddenly being spurred forward. But I felt sure it meant something, and it was plaguing me. I felt if I could get to the bottom of it all, I might understand everything else that had been happening to me, both as of late and throughout my life. The end of the article mentioned Douglas families, my family's long history of nervous mental conditions. I'd never heard anything about this before in my life. I dug deeper. Census records, obituaries, police blotters. A great uncle of mine I wasn't aware of who'd vanished on a hunting trip in 1952. A daughter of a great-granduncle who apparently died in a domestic accident after neighbors reported her screaming about a man in the attic. It's all the same, an unnavigable breadcrumb trail of mental breakdowns and inexplicable tragedies, all leading seemingly to nothing, and yet it all felt connected somehow. It's hard to explain how cagey I was at this time. It was getting more and more invasive to my daily life, too. Like, one time I was walking to my house from the college library where I'd been doing my research, when I saw that there was a dude walking up the street against me. Seemed like another college guy from the backpack in the direction he was headed, towards campus, way off into the distance. This particular street is long and straight. He's walking up towards me as we kept approaching one another. He came more into vision, and the guy's face was now less hazy from distance. He was starting to look exactly like a guy called Richie who'd been in my year back in high school. I hadn't really been super close friends with him, and I never saw much of him after starting college, since he hadn't had any interest in it and went straight to working at his dad's auto shop. That made this kind of strange, since Richie never went to college to my knowledge. Why'd he seem to go to campus with a backpack? But that was crazy talk. Richie, I was certain now it was him, could be going anywhere in this direction with a backpack for any reason, right? It's none of my business. And yet, I felt sure there was something to this, something that meant something. And then it got stranger, in a way, as Richie and I came even closer to each other, crossing paths at last. I realized I had been wrong. This guy didn't actually look anything like Richie as I remembered him at all. As we fully intersected and crossed paths, I was left wondering what I just experienced. Whether this man was or wasn't Richie. What was it about him that had led my mind to conjuring all that up? He hadn't actually done anything. As I thought about it, I couldn't even remember exactly what Richie actually did look like. And come to think of it, where was Richie? Did he even work at an auto shop at all? The only one around for miles is the one in my hometown, near Grandpa's house, that he and Petey worked at. This type of strangeness of thought and paranoia had been pervading my life ever since the experience during the acid trip. Little things like this kept cropping up throughout my day-to-day life, making me momentarily question my sense of self. And as it piled up, it all felt both more and more disjointed and ontologically incompatible, and more like it was all connected. I just couldn't work out why or how. It was like there was something truly, utterly terrible hiding somewhere just out of frame in the metaphorical TV screen that I was viewing my memories through. And maybe the more I began to remember, defenses had been put in place and all these ominous, contradictory threads had been thrown at me. Maybe I was simply not supposed to remember. I wondered if maybe my salvation was buried deep in my memories too. What if all I had to do was keep trying to trigger more and more memories? Because if I could just remember enough about something, I could get to the bottom of it all and expose whoever was behind it. But then, what would that something even be? And something else had been growing, a feeling that it was all would be coming to a head soon somehow. Anthony found me at the campus library. He looked scared. "Jack, you have to stop this shit, bro," he said, lowering his voice. He sounded the least stoned I'd heard him in a while. "I looked a bit into your family. This whole thing doesn't feel like just a joke or a weird hallucination or whatever. Everyone like you's gone down this thing. They're gone. They've either disappeared or they killed themselves. You're chasing some kind of ghost story that's still making more." I heard his words. I really did. But as he was speaking, the other voice of Anthony, The one from before, the internal one, was smoother, clearer. It didn't even sound much like Anthony anymore. It was just a calm, neutral tone, but I knew it was the same voice. He is a guardian, it said. The voice full of hate and causing flashes in my mind of teeth, of hair, of darkness, spiders, asphalt. He keeps the lambs from the pasture. I didn't tell Anthony what I heard this time. I thanked him for his concern and told him I thought I was getting over it all anyway. Inside my mind, however, the size of the rift that I'd instantaneously felt open up between us was like suddenly getting dropped into the Grand Canyon. I didn't know what to think about anything anymore. The signals were changing. They weren't just commentary anymore. They're navigational. Like, yesterday I was stoned and watching a nature documentary. I hadn't been to any of my classes or my job for a while. I was trying to put myself into a foggy headspace deliberately now. Try to elicit more and more of the static in my subconscious, hoping it might trigger memories that could reveal more clues to me. I've been denying myself sleep, deliberately zoning out to music or the TV, getting high nonstop. I'd even been experimenting with binaural beats. As I was zoning out, high, reading some text on my phone, and absorbing the background noise of National Geographic. A generally quiet and easy cacophony had filled the room, until the sounds in the documentary of flowing water, of rustling leaves, of chirping birds, all tightened, sharpened, and became that same hate-filled voice like friction on a carpet. The map, the third, drawer, the green circle. I walked over to my desk, my body moving almost on its own. I pulled out the topographical map of the state park I'd picked up at their gift shop while I was driving home from Grandpa's, and all but forgotten about in the drawer. It was tucked into the third drawer, in the deep woodland, where Grandpa's story had taken place. Someone had drawn a small, precise circle in green ink. I don't even own a green pen. I knew what was in that circle. I didn't need to check the coordinates against my memories of the acid trip. I just knew it was all coming together now. I felt I was going to the woods. That brings us to the reason for my post. Folks, I'm not looking for answers anymore. I'm just leaving a record, a warning, maybe, for anyone else who hears the signal. Stop reading now if you're smart. Go back to your life. Consider the static nothing, but I went back to the woods. The green circle on the map was a pull I could never resist. The journey wasn't like the first time with Anthony. There was no laughter, no intoxication, no adventurous feelings. This was like a funeral march. I told no one I was going. The woods were silent in a way that felt intentional, like the birds and the insects were holding their breath. I didn't need the map at all. My own blood seemed to know the way, pulling me forward like a diving rod tuned to a lucid nightmare. The air grew colder, felt denser. The familiar panicky stutter in my perception I've experienced throughout my life was no longer a glitch here. It was the dominant signal. And then, amongst all the thin birch trees and cracked beams of sunlight dispersed into the canopy overhead, I saw the door. It was exactly as Grandpa Francis had described. A simple, freestanding doorframe of dark, weathered wood. No walls or house to be seen. It was just there. It was both the most utterly mundane and the most wrong thing I've ever witnessed. The sight of it radiated waves of something bad. Just pure bad. There was something inherent to the doorframe. Something hidden beneath the atoms and the different materials and components that made up its structure. Something lurking within that sent my nervous system into a state or revolt. Something about the doorframe and its presence here violated reality simply by existing. As I stood there, maybe 10 feet away, the final broadcast from the signal came through. It wasn't even a voice this time, more like a knowing, a sudden injection of utter truth. A data packet that an unknown force had suddenly downloaded directly into my soul for me. I understood. The door changed me. It changes us. It breaks our filters. When I saw who I felt impossibly was Douglas, I think the voice in my head of Anthony was telling the truth. In a way, I think it was. I must have seen the devil. I saw him, who had walked through the doorway and been changed. He was perceiving everything like how I felt I could suddenly perceive everything. The weight of time, the memories trapped in the soil, the silent anguish of every living thing for miles. That must have been why I called him the devil. I thought desperately. It was the only word big enough to hold the terror. The signal, the static, everything, I think it's what's on the other side of that filter. It's the raw data of existence. Beautiful, entrancing, labyrinthine, terrible, unbearable. Stepping through the door would be to understand everything, to become a clear channel. I would know why Douglas built his stone archways. I would know the name of the woman singing in my fan. I would know what the rocks remember. I would also cease to be Jack. I would be a vessel, overflowing, forever drowning in an ocean, a psychic avalanche of disjointed truths. I stood at the threshold for a long time. I felt the pull. The part of me that has always been curious, that has always listened, wanted nothing more than to step forward and finally know. I thought of Anthony's face then, full of fear. I thought of dead spiders curling up and on themselves. I thought of rusty nails and electrical heat and gnashing teeth. And I thought of darkness, and I thought of life. I felt nauseous beyond belief and fell for a second to my knees. I thought of my grandfather, who lived a long, pleasant, and normal life apart from one very strange day in the woods, because he'd ran away from this very clearing in them. I thought of the simple pleasure of a family gathering, of getting high and goofing off with a friend, of playing sports, of brewing coffee in the morning, of having a beer and awkwardly making small talk or catching up with someone. I made my choice. I turned my back on the door. I didn't run, I walked, one foot in front of the other, away from the clearing, away from the silence, back towards a world of cardboard and whispers. I am home now. The world is quiet. The signal is gone. That's the lie I have to tell myself to get through the day. The truth is, the signal isn't gone, I don't think. I think I've done something permanent to my ability to receive it. Whatever it really is, I had to survive. It's like I've taken a weed whacker to my own mind with a psychological scorched tar policy. I've severed the connection, and I've scarred a landscape. The world feels gray, flat, the colors are muted. Music doesn't really feel like music anymore, more like an arrangement of notes and beats in an order that's sonically pleasing to human brain for whatever evolutionary reason. A joke is just a sequence of information drip-fed to build toward a reveal and punchline. I still laugh, but more in an, oh, that's clever kind of way. The deep, intuitive part of me that sometimes just felt sure of certain things is now silent. It's a numbness that I think I will carry for the rest of my life. I saw Anthony yesterday. We had a beer. It was a slight bit awkward and stilted. He says I seem better, more grounded. I agreed, and it was almost like old times between the two of us. But he doesn't understand, will likely never understand, that I had to cripple a part of myself forever to achieve this peace. I am safe. I am sane. I am empty. The door is still there in the woods too, of course. And sometimes in the dead of the night, when the silence is absolute, I can feel the ghost of the static's hum, a phantom limb of the soul, and I am filled with the most profound anguish and regret. So profound it feels almost alien, not for what I found, but for what I had to destroy myself to get away from it. Don't look for the door. If you hear the static's hum, learn to live with it. The only thing worse than hearing that signal is the silence you have to create to make it stop. Story 10. The night my dog forgot how to bark. If you want a reason to keep your dog on a leash even when you're miles from anyone, here's mine. I took Boone, 4-year-old cattle dog with the posture of a retired sergeant, into the broken birch backcountry the first weekend of October. I don't live to court danger. I'm not one of those van life, but with frostbite guys, I just needed out. The city up in a bowl, someone kept tapping with a spoon. Sirens. Neighbors' arguments through the vent, my phone buzzing itself hot with group chats I never asked to be in. Boone knew it too. He'd stand at the door when I put my boots on and breathe this theatrical sigh. Somewhere along the way we started understanding each other better than most people I've dated. I did it right. Left the itinerary taped to my kitchen counter. Texted coordinates to my sister, who hates camping but loves reasons to worry. Charged a Garmin InReach. Checked the weather twice. Brought a first aid kit that could patch drywall. I picked a loop that starts at an old Forest Service road near the township line and climbs 2 ridges with shallow saddle in the middle. 7 miles of first aid, 5 the second, with a camp somewhere in the saddle. Creek water cold and clean this time of year. Poplars yellowing, mosquitoes already bore with us. At the trailhead, the sun-faded Carsonite post still read FR221, Gate 9 in black stick-on letters. The kind you only ever see on USFS signs. There's a CC Sierra foundation there. Just waist-high stone rectangles like molars sticking out of the ground. I camped near it once years ago. It always felt like leaving your tent beside an empty parking lot. Familiar, but not quite comforting. On a map, it's unremarkable. In person, it has the vibe of a forgotten porch. I don't have better words for it. We started at noon under a sky the exact gray of wet concrete. The lot was empty except for a rusted horse trailer and a styrofoam coffee cup caught on a spear of goldenrod. I clipped Boone's collar, the good one with the orange GPS puck, and he pressed his shoulder into my thigh like, "Hurry up, you've been talking about this all week." The first miles were just us, and the zipper boots on frost-curled leaves. Boone takes point like a soldier, head low, ears rotating. Every 20 yards he checks back, and if I'm too slow he stops and looks wounded until I catch up. If there's a person on the trail, he sits to the side, immaculate manners. If there's a chipmunk, he pretends he didn't see it like a gentleman. About 2 hours in, we crossed a creek that had braided itself into 3 shallow channels. The rocks, they looked like something simmered them. Every step felt like dipping a toe into a dentist tray. Coming up the far bank, Boone did something he doesn't do. He froze and stared at nothing. Not the alert, not the point, not the goof where he pretends a breeze is an intruder. He went still the way a bird goes still when a shadow crosses it. 1 paw up, 1 paw down. Neck extended. His mouth closed and stayed closed. The hair on his spine lifted in a harbor wave. "What?" I said, "Because you always say what even though the dog can't answer." He didn't look at me. He didn't sniff. He didn't do the polite little head till that means squirrel. He just stared into a clump of young firs like there was a TV screen hidden in there, and the show was about him. Maybe 40 seconds passed that felt like someone had dropped the dome over us. I didn't hear the creek anymore. I didn't hear birds. There was a mosquito hovering near my wrist, and I couldn't hear that either. When sound came back, it felt like a door unlatched somewhere. You probably know that sensation from losing power in your house, and then the refrigerator kicks back on, and you realize there had been a hum the whole time. Boone's paw set down. He looked back at me, blinked, shook off like he'd stepped out of rain, and then he pulled himself together so hard it was almost mannered. A quick head rub against my hip, a wag exactly 4 beats long, and we walked on. Deer, I told myself, or maybe a feral hog, even though I haven't seen one this far north and I don't want to. Probably a deer. It bothered me that my brain offered deer like a polite suggestion, not a conviction. I've seen enough deer to know the texture of deer in the air. The wet mulch scent, the sudden whicker, the wood-on-wood click of a hoof that isn't careful. Whatever Boone had stared at had the texture of nothing. If I waved my arm into it, I had the sense it would disappear around my elbow and come back sticky. We reached the saddle around for. The CCC Foundation had collected a shallow drift of leaves inside it like someone had tried to pour autumn and it slopped. The stone was damp in stripes where the sun lost interest. A pair of old square nails lay beside one corner like a present. Boone did his perimeter tribe. I set the tent in the lee of the highest wall, near a birch that had lived long enough to twist itself into a question mark. The ground there is rooty but dry. The creek is 20 yards down, and the water runs cold enough to bite the finger pads. Someone had left a pile of firewood the way good people do, tucked under a rotting plank, so it was mostly dry. I strung a bear line and hung our food. 2 dry bags that made me feel virtuous and clumsy at the same time. I'm not naive enough to think any of it stops a determined animal, but it slows the opportunistic ones. And I've met more raccoons with PhDs than I have bears in this forest. I tied a trucker's hitch. No, that's not right. It was a panicky clove hitch with an extra half hitch because my hands wouldn't stop being hands. By dusk, dinner steamed in a metal bowl and smelled like someone had bribed Bean to pretend to be chilly. Boone ate half his kibble and then leaned closer to the tent than he normally would, like he wanted to be touching it while he chewed. When I sat, he moved so his thigh pressed my boot. You collect little data points about your dog without realizing it. How far his nose goes into the bowl, how he lifts his head at the same point in every meal like he's saying grace. All those tiny habits were half a degree off. Nothing anyone else would notice. Enough for me to feel like the campsite was vastly crowded by something that had arrived early and taken the good chair. When the dark actually came, it came quick. The clouds had thickened, so the sky didn't bother with the sunset. One moment the birch had definition, and the next it was a sketch in charcoal. I got a fire going that hissed like a mild argument, and added a piece of birch that caught well and smelled clean the air. The creak seemed to adjust the fire's volume, and sounded louder in response, like a person you're trying to talk over. I wear a headlamp that has a red mode, so you can keep your night sight. If you've never used one, red turns the immediate world into a basement darkroom. Edges without glare, a sense of time paused. I use it in camp because it helps you see beyond what you're doing. White light makes a wall. Red light makes a bubble. You want a bubble in the woods at night, not a wall. The first odd noise wasn't odd. It was a footfall. You can tell a lot by footfalls. 2 feet, or feet, confident or hesitant, heavy or draggy. This one was measured and wrong. Wrong in the way a metronome sounds wrong if you've only ever listened to human music. Too even, no stumbles, no little staccato adjustments. From the trilline to our flame, step, 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 and stop. Then nothing. Boone raised his head slowly. He did not make a sound. His whole body made itself long. Neck extended, ears flat, chest resting between his paws, eyes as round as a picture of eyes. His mouth stayed closed. Dogs are a mouth species. They breathe truth out of it. When Boone keeps his mouth closed, he is pretending he is not a dog. Hello, I said before I could catch the word. A shameful word in the dark forest. Hello is a city word, a doorbell word. It marks you as someone who believes conversation solves most things. Nothing moved. The fire popped and sent up one spark that died at eye level like a tiny planet lost interest in being bright. There was a sound I took a moment to name, because I had never heard it in the woods at night. The jingle of metal tags. Leash tags. The exact rhythm of Boone's. 2 rings and a rabies chip. A specific 3-note clink I could recognize across a dog park. Boone's head whipped toward the sound, then back to me. He wasn't wearing them. I'd taken them off earlier to clean the mud from under the split ring, set them on the tent's vestibule mat, and then, distracted, forgotten to put them back on. The little pile of metal was 7 inches from my boot. The jingle came again. Identical rhythm. Not close. Somewhere back in the trees, maybe 20 yards out, exactly where the line between firelight and forest began. Then it stopped on a dime, and the silence that came after felt like a mouth closed too carefully. I told myself I was hearing a buck's antlers brushing a branch. People do that all the time. There are jokes about it. Ghost bells that turn into a buck in November. You want to be that. You want to be anything with a heart you can point at and count. Boone, I said quiet. He'd shifted. His shoulder now pressed against my boot hard enough for Bone to know it. The red of my headlamp turned his eyes into black holes that smoked lightly. Step, step, step. It came from a different angle now, 45 degrees to the left, but with the same metronome precision. No branch snap, no leaf hiss. The steps sounded like someone pressing a boot into damp cardboard. Then the tags again, 1, 2, 3. With the exact pause in the middle where Boone's 2 rings sometimes knock against each other. Who's there? I asked before I could stop it. Who's there? Came back, in my own voice from the dark. There are parlor tricks in the woods. Owls can do a passable human whistle. Foxes have a bark that sounds like a child trying not to cry. I've heard coyotes make a noise that convinced me a woman needed help until I found the tracks. But hearing your own voice come back at you from a stand of black spruce, that eats a chunk out of your mind, and you don't realize how big the chunk is until later. Boone stood, not a muscle twitch. He simply collected himself and stood the way a kid stands when a stranger says his name from a white van. He leaned into me so hard I had to put a hand on the tent to keep from tipping. "You have to go," my voice said from the trees, conversational and flat, as if it had been waiting to enter at that line in the script. I stood too fast and kicked my spoon into the fire. My headlamp went wild and turned the nearest trunks into sudden red bones. The dark beyond them looked oiled. "Not funny," I said, which was nothing and made me feel like a 12-year-old resisting a dare. "Not funny." My voice agreed from the black, slightly closer, and in the wrong cadence, like it had arranged the words by height, not meaning. The fire must have cracked in that exact second, because the forest flickered, and for a fraction of a blink, the space between two firs went from a painting to a window. There was something tall in it, not tall like a tree, tall like a person standing on a stump trying on the idea of taller. The outline clicked off my retina the way lightning does, and what remained when my eyes caught up was more upsetting than the shape had been. A clean emptiness, exactly where something had been. Boone's mouth opened. No bark came out. He tried. I watched his ribs spread, watched the cords of his neck lift, saw him build a sound from belly to throat, and then nothing. It was like a film cut, like the projectionist had taken scissors to the frame where noise should occur. His jaw moved. His body spoke. The part you hear did not exist. The jingle came again. 1, 2, 3. Closer. Everything inside me went very tidy. Panic is messy. Whatever was moving through the trees didn't leave me room for that. It felt like trying to play chess with someone who had already touched all your pieces early in the day and learned their weight. There's a clarity to it that is not courage. I took Boone's collar from the tent mat and looped it onto him in the red light. He took it the way he takes vet visits, trusting and insulted at once. I slipped the paracord line from my bear hanging to a triangle around our camp, knee-high, tied off at 3 trees, an ugly tripwire covered in leaves. I scavenged a dozen old spoons and a pot from the fire grate and hung them near the tent door like a sad wind chime. If it was human, it would laugh. If it was an animal, it would either not care or care too late. I don't know what I hoped from a third category. "You have to go," the tree said, this time with a wetness to it, like there was shape in my voice around a mouth not made for it. I thought about using the in-reach. I didn't. The nearest fire road gate is 2 miles off that saddle and is usually locked. Rangers have to coordinate to get out here. I didn't want to pin my night to a maybe. Besides, there's a small stubborn part of me that wanted to keep the thing that used my voice from knowing I could ask for help. It is hard to admit how childlike that reasoning was. "Leave," I said for me, not it. "Leave," it said back. And then something moved behind the firs in a way that made less sense than the words had. A smooth roll followed by too many short adjustments, like a horse trying to learn stairs. I reached for the bear spray, and for once I didn't hate its pink cap and the little deterrent euphemism on the label. Boone moved exactly where he's been trained with the word center, between my legs, facing out. He has only ever done that in our hallway as a game. He did it now with a grimness I will never forget. The leash went taut and the leather creaked like teeth. When it finally breached the edge of the light, it came in parts. First the tags, shiny, swinging, catching firelight, except not Boone's, not any dogs. A bunch of them, maybe a dozen, hung on a length of cord I didn't want to examine. Different shapes, different silvers. The flashing map of lost dogs. Then a shoulder, naked of fur but colored like fur, as if someone had painted an arm and then smudged it with soil where the elbow should be. It stepped over the paracord without looking like it knew where it was. It did not trip the spoons. It did not hurry. It came like someone entering a room they have owned forever and are surprised to find you in. I could not tell you the shape of its head. The red light turned edges into lies. It was lower than it should have been and too still. If you told me it was wearing a deer skull, I'd call you dramatic. If you told me it was wearing nothing, I'd call you wrong. It had the suggestion of ears in the wrong place. It had the idea of a snout without the engineering. The tags swung and clicked their 3-beat jingle. Boone pressed so hard into my shins that my knees popped. He tried to bark again and failed again, and the effort made a wet click in his throat that I still hear when I do dishes. I think, This part is me thinking that whatever was had worn a dog sound recently enough to be wearing some of that dog still. I don't have proof. I have the way Boone's voice went missing, and the way the tags flashed like fish answering a net. I had a road flare in my kit. People argue about them. They're heavy, they're overkill, they're not leave no trace. I carry one for exactly 2 reasons. Signal if I break an ankle, and last resort if something with the brain decides I am decor. I cracked it with my thumbnail in cowardice, and it burned to life like a small piece of savagery, white, red, and furious. Whatever had come to my camp moved back fast enough to skid leaves with that wet folder sound. The flare light doesn't throw a lot of width, but it throws intensity. In that burn, I saw a leg wrong. Not wrong as in broken. Wrong as in built by a list that had 2 lists under it. Something had copied the idea of a knee and then given up half an inch before it was finished. It bent in a way you know immediately would fail, underweight, if the world were fair. There were deep lines in the skin, not wrinkles, not furrows. More like seams where something had decided to try on a different way of being, and then kept both. Go, I said, with all the adult authority I use when telling Boone not to beg. It came out thin. I hate writing this part because people decide I'm lying at exactly this sentence. The sound from the birch would be saying, good boy, but I had a weight that only comes when I press my mouth into the fur behind Boone's ear and tell him that an inch from the skin, it had my breath in it, my warmth. It knew how I sound when I'm embarrassing in love with my dog. I threw the flare at the dark and missed. It hissed in wet leaves and turned the space into a crime scene for a heartbeat. The thing that had come in from the left slipped out of the light and did not make a branch move. The voice behind us made a high, quiet whistle. Boone's recall whistle. He didn't move. That's the best part of the story, and the part one owe him for the rest of his life. I didn't sleep that night. Nobody slept. I sat with my back against the tent, one hand wrapped in Boone's collar, the other wrapped around the bear spray until my knuckles numbed. The flare died in a smell like an old sparkler and a new tire. The fire reduced to a red logic puzzle. The rain came and didn't touch us, and then decided to, thin and mean and constant. The tags moved around our camp in a wide circle, jingling on that exact rhythm. Once, at maybe 3 in the morning, they sounded from up in the trees, as if the idea of gravity had been paused. At some point, my head dropped forward in that miserable nod you do on a red-eye flight. I woke to Boone's shoulder slamming my knee. Morning had not arrived. The world was simply paler about the fact that it wasn't night. The tags were still. The woods had resumed the soundtrack you play to a baby in a stroller. Leaves, water, far bird, the quiet after thunder. Boone licked my wrist once like we'd both been rude. We didn't pack so much as we vacuumed ourselves up. The tent went into the bag like laundry you promised to fold later. I lowered the bear line, and something had chewed clean through a corner of one of the dry bags. Not the food, the extra line. I don't know why that bothered me more than anything else. The trail back seemed shorter. I know the psychology. Fear makes you leave in a straight line where the way was exploratory. Even knowing that, it felt as if the ridge had tilted, like we were on a Hail Mary play headed downhill. Boone walked heel, without a word. If he ranged ahead, he returned so fast as nail scuff, like he was on a bungee. At the creek crossing with the heat-simmered rocks, he stopped and stared again. Same posture, same lifted paw. Then he tilted his head 3 degrees to the right, and the air bulged. That's all I can tell you. Like you see a fish roll under a lake from the way the light distorts. He didn't blink. He didn't tremble. His tag jingled. His real one now, 1 to 3. And somewhere beyond the trees it jingled back. I don't remember the last mile. Memory does that. It protects you by cutting around the part where your brain would otherwise make new shapes. We reached a lot to find a horse trailer had gone, and a truck had replaced it. Mud up the wheel wells. Radio thumping the bass line that felt like the muscle of a headache. A guy with eyes like gravel leaned against his tailgate holding a chainsaw case and a thermos. Green Stanley, chipped with a faded Packers decal. He looked us over in the appraising way men who grew up in the same place look at each other. Decided we weren't worth a story and nodded. Any luck? I asked, because I needed a human word to anchor the day. He considered that. Not with what I came for. he said finally. He glanced toward the tree line and did a subtle thing with his mouth I've only ever seen at funerals. I didn't ask to follow a question. I didn't say skinwalker. It's not my word to throw around. It's the closest word without turning it into a chase scene. Call it a mimic if you need a generic. Call it the thing that learned my dog's name before I said out loud. I put Boone in the back seat, and he laid down with his chin between his paws in a way that probably looks like "good tired" on a postcard. I could see the corner of his tag, the blue rabies chip. And I wanted to cry that particular dumb cry where you cry because a detail is too ordinary to be real. On the drive out, my phone vibrated itself awake. Bars again. Notifications rolled up, frantic as geese. My sister. Check in. My boss. Can I pick up an extra shift Monday? A number I didn't recognize and will never call back. 2 missed calls from Sunday between 1:12 a.m. and 1:14 a.m. The voicemails, when I forced myself to listen that afternoon, were nothing but a hollow, far-off clicking like utensils tapping together in a pocket. At home, Boone drank like he'd been on a boat, and then crawled under the desk where he never goes and slept for 10 hours making soft runs of breath. When he woke up, he was himself. He wanted dinner enough to argue about it. He wanted to chase his rubber chicken exactly 3 times and then sigh like a widow. He sat for me, down for me, rolled over with resentment. When I unpacked, I found the spoon I'd kicked into the coals welded in a black scab to the pot. I tossed the whole thing in the trash and felt guilty about aluminum for an hour. He still doesn't bark. He tries sometimes. Someone knocks at the door and he does a whole choreography. Head up, alert, the breath, the effort. And then it's like the sound hits an invisible wall. He makes a small click deep in the mouth that isn't a bark and isn't entirely a laugh. It makes the hair on my arms lift in a way the actual night in the woods didn't. The vet says his throat looks fine. Larynx smooth. No infection. No scar. Nothing to medicate. Nothing to cut. Sometimes trauma makes a habit. She offered with compassion that made me feel like I brought her a poem to grade. I took him in at 10:30 a.m. on Tuesday. They typed his name wrong on the check-in sheet, and I didn't correct it. At 2 in the morning, when the city is a hell breath and the hallway is just a strip of blue, I'll hear his tags jingle. 1, 2, 3. The same rhythm he's always had. He'll be asleep under my desk. The sound will come from the doorway or the kitchen or from right by my bed in a way that makes your heart decide to beat at a polite volume and then change his mind. Once last week, I woke to the soft clink of tags in the apartment below me, then above, then in the wall behind the headboard, so close the drywall popped with a tiny expansion a nail makes when weight leans on it. Boone lifted his head, closed his mouth like someone closing a book, and put one paw on my ankle with a seriousness that exceeded language. I replaced his collar with one that doesn't have tags. His rabies chip is scanned and logged. I keep his records on my phone and in my glove compartment. His name is stitched into the band in black thread. It doesn't change anything. The sound still comes when it wants to, in threes. As if a hand you don't want to picture is shuffling through a set of shapes until it finds ours. I won't be going back to that saddle. Not because I'm brave and learned something, or because I'm scared and learned something else. Not because I think that place is bad like a movie or haunted like a maze at a carnival. I'm not even sure the place has much to do with it beyond the practical. That ridge is just where a thing with too much time and a talent for practicing found someone who said hello when he should have closed his mouth. You might read this looking for rules. Don't whistle. Don't stare. Don't say your dog's name out loud. Don't light a fire. Do light a fire. Everything in the woods is a rule until it isn't. I'm offering you one that isn't folklore and isn't science and might keep something important inside you unbroken. If the night gives you back your own words, don't give it any more to work with. And leash your dog, not because of fines or courtesy or deer. Leash him because you don't want to learn how it feels when the woods uses his voice to cut a small, precise hole out of you and keep it. Boone's asleep under the desk again while I type this. His paws twitch in a dream, and once in a while he makes that click, like a camera failing to take a picture. The hallway is quiet. The city hum is back. Someone in the building across the way is watching a game. A siren moves past and becomes less than a thought. From the kitchen, 1 to 3. He lifts his head. He doesn't bark. I say nothing at all.